Chapter 979. Although the whole country of Japan had paid great attention to this tea competition, they had frantically tracked down and reported their every move as soon as they landed. Although paparazzi and reporters were everywhere in modern society, it was too easy to find out a person's whereabouts. But this time their opponents and targets were Li Yundong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. Among them, one represented the highest peak of the Chinese cultivation world, and the other three were the Fairy Immortal, Earth Immortal, and Fox Immortal, who had become famous in the Japanese cultivation world after the battle with Nazuno. If they wanted to hide, no one in the world could find them. Therefore, after Li Yundong and the others showed up, it was as if they had disappeared from the world and they could no longer be found. The Japanese press was going crazy. They couldn't wait to turn over the place where Li Yundong lived and search for him, but they couldn't find any trace of Li Yundong and the others. They had no choice but to focus their attention on the Japanese tea ceremony circle. Japanese people loved tea, especially tea ceremony banquets and tea battles. The tea battle in the Japanese tea ceremony was completely different from the tea battle in China. There were many schools in the Japanese tea ceremony world. There were more than 20 schools such as the Yuri family, the Biao family, the Warrior Path family, the Zompian family, the Nanfang family, the Tsurui family, the Servo family, the Yuanzhou family, the Shizhou family, and so on. However, the famous schools in Japan had deep connections with the Japanese tea sage Senrikyu. At this time, Li Yundong was sitting cross-legged on the tatami, closing his eyes to rest. Next to him, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin were either kneeling or sitting cross-legged on the ground, watching the TV report. There was a live broadcast of the tea battle between the various schools in the Japanese tea ceremony world. This situation was very similar to when Wu Qingyuan was invincible in Japan. The highest tournament in the Japanese Go world, the Haninbo tournament, gathered the strongest Go players in Japan and let them fight it out one by one. Then the strongest player was sent to Wu Qingyuan for him to kill. As a high-profile visitor, Li Yundong was like a shark, immediately stirring up the originally peaceful water of the Japanese tea ceremony world, and it became turbulent and undulating. Although Zhou Qin had a certain understanding of tea drinking, it was only limited to the quality of tea leaves. She might not have a deep understanding of the tea ceremony. Su Chan was the same. Although the little girl had been taught traditional cultivation by Ao Wushuang since she was a child, she was helpless. Her cultivation was half-baked. If it weren't for the chance, it would be wishful thinking for her to cultivate to the level of the nine-tailed fox in this life. Therefore, the two of them stared at the tea contest on the TV with their eyes wide open. From time to time they would chatter with each other. "What faction is this?" Su Chan pointed at a man in a solemn loose kimono on the TV and asked with wide round eyes. Zhou Qin tried hard to see a few Chinese characters occasionally appearing in a series of Japanese words on the TV screen. She said with difficulty, "It seems to be something like So Niliu or something." She turned her head to look at Zi Yuan and asked, "Zi Yuan, what does it say?" Zi Yuan stared at the rapidly scrolling subtitles and said, "It says that the one appearing now is So Niliu Jian." Su Chan asked curiously, "What kind of faction is So Niliu?" Zi Yuan stared at it and said quickly, "So Niliu is one of the early tea ceremony schools in Japan. It was founded in the Azuchi Momoyama era, that is, between 1568 and 1600 AD, by So Niliu Shaoji, who is the senior brother of the Japanese tea sage Senrikyu. This school has been protected by the West Hope Temple, which is also known as the Pure Land Sect, for generations. It can be said that it is a huge tea ceremony group under the influence of the Pure Land Sect." Su Chan and Zhou Qin suddenly understood. Although the two of them didn't know much about the Japanese tea ceremony, they still knew Senrikyu. He was a giant in the Japanese tea ceremony, and even the world tea ceremony. He was a towering mountain that could not be bypassed no matter what angle one looked at it from. He had developed the Japanese tea ceremony to a very high level. In terms of realm alone, his realm was no lower than that of Luyu, the god of tea of China. Therefore, although they didn't know much about So Niliu, when it was mentioned that its founder, So Niliu Shaoji, was Senrikyu's senior brother, the two of them were immediately in awe. They stared at So Niliu with their eyes wide open, wanting to see how good his tea fighting skills were. They saw the solemn atmosphere in the tea house on the live TV. Even the sound in the TV seemed to have disappeared when the island appeared. Everyone was calm and focused, staring at the island. The status of Japanese tea ceremony grandmaster is extremely high. Over the years, when Japanese shrines hold sacrifices, there must be a large-scale sacred and solemn tea ceremony. Among them, Japan's famous Toyokuni Shrine's tea ceremony is held by Yoshinobu Jiyuan. The Serval family had been blessed by the Pure Land True sect for generations. Although it was impossible for him to obtain the true inheritance of the Pure Land True sect's powerful magic, his realm of Zen cultivation was not low. Every step he took was extremely rigorous. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that every step he took was exactly the same. It was as if he was a programmed robot. There was absolutely no difference at all. Especially when he walked into the tea room, dressed in a black kimono with white embroidery, holding the famous eggplant of the Okinawa clan, according to the prescribed position, took the prescribed tea set, and then according to the prescribed order of making tea, according to the prescribed etiquette, the two of them really sucked in a breath of cold air. When foreigners or outsiders saw Japanese tea ceremony grandmasters making tea, they would only think that their movements were elegant and slow, but they could not see the reason behind it. However, Su Chan and Zhou Qin were both discerning people. Naturally, they could see at a glance that every move of the island had been tempered. It was just like when he made tea according to the most rigorous etiquette of the three major etiquettes of the tea ceremony: charcoal etiquette, strong tea etiquette, and weak tea etiquette. This Serval family had extremely strict standards and requirements for the use of the round bamboo brush, the height of the lifting position, the way the small silk cloth was folded, the way the tea ladle was handled, and the method and strength of pounding the tea leaves. He would not increase or decrease a point. The other judges who were kneeling in the tea house stared at the island like hawks. As long as he made the slightest mistake, points would be deducted immediately. Su Chan and Zhou Qin were dumbfounded in front of the TV, and Ziyuan was also frowning. According to the Japanese tea ceremony, even if Lu Yu, the tea god of China, came, he would lose. Su Chan and Zhou Qin naturally thought of this. They looked at Ziyuan, who had the highest cultivation of tea art, as if asking for help. They wanted to see what she could do. Zhou Qin quickly glanced at Li Yundong, who was sitting next to him with his eyes closed, and turned a deaf ear to everything around him. She lowered her voice and said to Ziyuan, "Ziyuan, what should we do? We don't understand this kind of tea competition at all." Su Chan couldn't help but complain, "Yes, this is too abnormal. Do Japanese people have to be so exaggerated and complicated to drink tea?" Soon she asked curiously, "Sister Ziyuan, do Japanese people always fight tea like this?" Ziyuan frowned and shook her head. "No, it's not like this. The tea competition in Japan is different from the tea competition in China. The tea competition in China originated from the gathering of scholars. The scholars in China were the privileged class in feudal society. In other words, tea parties and tea competitions were activities that only the privileged class could enjoy. But when the tea competition spread to Japan, it evolved into a unique activity of the Japanese privileged class, that is, the samurai class. The tea competition also changed from an elegant thing to a gathering to expand social relations, show off all kinds of goods imported from China, and eat and drink to their heart's content. Ziyuan stared at Jia Yuan's every move, as if she was memorizing all his movements. She said quickly, "At the beginning of this tea party, it's very noisy, as if they are going to a fair. It's very improper. At the tea party there are many people who are bare-chested, naked, and crazy. It wasn't until 1489 that the 8th generation of shogunate, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, began to regulate the tea competition and tea parties. At this time, the tea party and tea competition in Japan began to slowly become formal, sweeping away the previous chaotic atmosphere. Among them, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's cultural attendant Nengami made strict rules for the tea ceremony, such as the placement of the tea set, the way to hold it, the order of movements, the route of movement, and the number of steps to move. The tea competition and tea ceremony in Japan were developed on this basis. As Ziyuan spoke, she couldn't help looking at Li Yundong. Seeing that he was indifferent to all this, she frowned even more and sighed in her heart. This guy is really not anxious, but the eunuch is anxious. We are anxious to death here, but he is calm and steady. Doesn't he know that knowing oneself and knowing the enemy will win 100 battles? If he doesn't know anything about the Japanese tea ceremony, how can he win the tea competition? And Ziyuan looked down at a purple teapot in front of her, and she was even more worried in her heart. Although my top-grade Huangshan Yunfeng tea is an immortal tea, I'm afraid it won't be enough to compete with the top-grade tea stored by the Japanese tea family for generations on such a grand occasion. There were only a few aspects to a tea competition. The quality of the tea was extremely important. If the hardware was defeated at the beginning, then there would be no need to fight. No matter how fast the abacus was, it was impossible to be faster than a large electronic computer. Thinking of this, Ziyuan was worried. She was distracted, so she didn't see the movements of Xiao Dao on the TV just now. When she came to her senses, Xiao Dao had already completed all the movements on the TV and slowly left the field. Jia Yuan was a giant and guru in the Japanese tea ceremony. As soon as he left the field, all the referees on the field stood up and applauded, then bowed respectfully to see him off. Even the host was so excited that he shouted, "This is the real art of tea ceremony, this is the real tea ceremony." But before he finished shouting, there was a tsunami of cheers outside the competition venue. Soon the host shouted enthusiastically. Su Chan and Zhou Qin couldn't understand it all. They just looked blankly at the camera on the TV, which was aimed at an old man in his 50s with slightly gray temples. The old man was wearing a black and white kimono, walking slowly, and a line of words was typed on the TV screen. Although Zhou Qin and Su Chan didn't understand Japanese, they could understand a few Chinese characters in it. It clearly said, "Qian Jingji, the 16th generation descendant of the tea sage Qian Rixiu." Su Chan and Zhou Qin looked at each other. Su Chan couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Is this Qian Jingji so famous?" Zi Yuan said with a heavy heart, "Qian Rixiu's prestige in the Japanese tea ceremony world is unimaginable to ordinary people. The Qian Jiaoliu he founded is the most influential tea ceremony school in Japan, and the Qian Jiaoliu represented by Qian Jingji is the leading school in the Japanese tea ceremony world, just like the Longhu Mountain of Chinese Taoism and the Wutai Mountain of Chinese Buddhism. The level of tea ceremony of the island in front of us is already so high. I really can't imagine how high Qian Jingji's level of tea ceremony will be." While she was speaking slowly, she saw a few people suddenly come in from the front yard gate. The leader was led by a Japanese man who kept bowing and walking inside. As he walked, he shouted, "Master, I'm here. Why didn't you tell me that such a big thing had happened?" Zi Yuan turned her head and was overjoyed. She stood up and greeted him, "You're finally here. Where's the tea? Did you bring the tea I asked for?" It was even later, but tonight should be the last busy night recently. I've been really busy recently, staying up all night every day. Besides, which hero is so generous as to stamp the cover of my book so that it can't be seen? Chapter 980. It was none other than Qin Wankai, the second disciple of Li Yundong, who was much older than him. Bubble Qin Wankai had gone abroad to discuss business before, and no one had informed him of Li Yundong's situation. By the time he got the news and rushed back, Li Yundong had already agreed to go to Japan to participate in the tea competition. Zi Yuan couldn't stop Li Yundong, so she had to think of ways to help Li Yundong win in the tea competition. One of them was to ask Qin Wankai to use his connections and resources to get the best tea in the world. After Qin Wankai received the news from Zi Yuan, he immediately set about this matter. In this world, it was all thanks to him that he was able to get a set of extremely precious tea sets and a jar of extremely rare tea leaves in the shortest time possible. Behind him, his daughter, Shen Hui, was holding the tea set. Shen Hui carefully held a set of wooden tea sets in her hands and walked carefully. After entering the door, she dared to look inside. When she saw Li Yundong, she quickly lowered her eyes. After the Japanese boss welcomed the two of them into the door, he turned around and left. But no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't have imagined that these people were Li Yundong and his group, who were now the talk of Japan. After Qin Wankai entered the door, he saw that Li Yundong was meditating with his eyes closed. He was stunned, and then his footsteps were very light. He walked to Zi Yuan's side and asked in a low voice, "Master, are you meditating?" Zi Yuan smiled bitterly and said, "I don't know. Maybe. What tea did you bring?" Qin Wankai smiled mysteriously and said, "Open it and see for yourself." Shen Hui stepped forward and handed the teapot to Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan took it. As soon as she opened the lid, a fragrant smell came from inside. The fragrance assailed her nostrils, and in an instant, the whole room and yard were filled with the fresh smell of tea. Su Chan couldn't help but say, "It smells so good. What tea is this?" Zhou Qin also widened her eyes and looked at it. Zi Yuan glanced at the teapot and saw that the tea leaves in the teapot were black and long, like melon seeds. They didn't look obvious, but they smelled fragrant and had the fragrance of orchids. She raised her head and asked, "Wui de Hong Pao?" Qin Wankai excitedly gave a thumbs up. "That's right." Zhou Qin asked curiously, "Is it the Da Hong Pao from the mother tree?" Da Hong Pao could be said to be one of the most valuable tea leaves in the world. Because the tea trees grew on the cliffs of Mount Wui's Jiolong Nest, where the sunlight was short, the reflected light was abundant, and the temperature difference between day and night was large. Moreover, there was a fine spring at the top of the cliff all year round. There were only 6 Da Hong Pao tea trees in the world that could grow in such an environment. Although scientists had used asexual reproduction in the 1980s to reproduce Dahong Pao in batches, due to the change in their growing environment, the tea quality of these Dahong Pao tea leaves could not be mentioned in the same breath as the tea leaves picked from the cliffs of Geelongnest. Because of this, the 6 Dahong Pao trees were also known as the mother trees. The tea leaves harvested from them were worth tens of times more than gold. The rarest thing about the Dahong Pao that Chen Wankai brought was that it happened to be tea leaves picked during the Qingming festival. In the tea leaves there is a saying, 3 days early is a treasure, 3 days late becomes grass. It meant that the tea leaves picked before and after the Guyu season would have a completely different quality. The poet Hu Jiao also wrote, Chalcedony is cooked before the Guyu in the morning, and spring tea is the freshest. It was referring to the tea leaves before the Guyu, which were of the highest quality. The Qingming festival was the season before the Guyu. Although this season was already a useless cultivation time for the cultivation world, it was the golden time for the tea world. The Japanese tea ceremony world was naturally well aware of this, so almost every tea battle in the Japanese tea ceremony world was held during the Qingming festival. At this time the tea leaves were fresh and tender, which was the most suitable for tea battles. Therefore Chen Wankai proudly pointed to the tea leaves in the tea can and said, "This was bought by a tea house owner who spent a lot of money to get it through the back door. In the end I robbed it." This kind of mother tree Dahong Pao before the rain was not something that could be bought with money alone. No one knew what methods Chen Wankai had used to snatch these tea leaves, which were dozens of times more expensive than gold, from the hands of others. Su Chan and Zhou Qin naturally knew how expensive this tea was. Even though Li Yundong was not a poor man now, if de Sangxian wanted to buy such top-grade tea, he had no way to do so even if he had money, and even if he had connections he didn't have enough money. Zhou Qin picked up a piece of tea with her hand, sniffed it and said with a smile, "This is good. At least I won't lose to others in terms of tea leaves." Su Chan looked at the tea leaves and blinked. She couldn't wait to make a pot of it now and taste the tea leaves that were dozens of times more expensive than gold. Ziyuan's heart also relaxed a little. She looked at the tea set in Xin Hui's hand. Seeing her gaze, Xin Hui untied the outer packaging. Ziyuan saw that there was an antique tea set inside. The first thing she saw was the rabbit hair teacup. Ziyuan looked up at Li Yundong and asked, "Li Yundong, say something. What do you think of such a tea set and tea leaves?" Li Yundong smiled slightly, opened his eyes, took a look and said with a smile, "Very good." Su Chan, Ziyuan, and the others were all delighted, but as soon as they smiled, Li Yundong shook his head and said, "But we still can't win the tea competition." The people in the room looked at each other. Chen Wankai couldn't help but ask anxiously, "Master, what else are you missing? Tell me, I will definitely find a way to get it." Li Yundong laughed and pointed to Qian Jingji, who was performing the tea ceremony on TV, and said, "Do you think it's possible for us to win if we make a last-minute effort and compete with the Japanese tea ceremony according to their rules?" Ziyuan leaned forward slightly and asked, "Li Yundong, you don't want to lose the game on purpose like you did with Zhang Tianshi, do you?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No, Celestial Master Zhang is a gentleman. Besides, this is a private duel which is harmless. But now the tea competition has caused a lot of noise. I can afford to lose, but the Chinese tea ceremony world and the cultivation world that I represent can't afford to lose." And Li Yundong stood up, smiled and said, "I can lose to anyone but the Japanese." Su Chan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and couldn't help asking, "Then what about you? How can you win?" Li Yundong smiled confidently, got up and walked out of the door saying, "Let's go. It's time to go to the banquet." 2 days after Li Yundong went out, the tea competition that caused a sensation in the tea ceremony world in Japan was finally decided. After a fierce competition between the Neon family, the Neon family, the Neon family, and the Neon family, the Neon family, which specialized in serving the nobles in Japan, finally won and represented Japan in the tea competition with Li Yundong. The place of the tea competition was set in the Bushen Nunnery in Shangjing, where the Neon family lived. Early in the morning, there were all kinds of news vehicles parked near the Bushen Nunnery in Kyoto. Countless TV stations and reporters gathered there. The reporters and hosts from various Japanese TV stations were loudly reporting what was about to happen here. The head of the Neon family, Qian Jingji, had already taken a bath and changed his clothes early, waiting at the gate of the Bushen Nunnery. Although the heads of the other Japanese schools did not obtain the final qualification, they had also taken a bath and changed their clothes early. They came to the Bushen Nunnery and waited for the beginning of this unprecedented event. Since Li Yundong and the others had not arrived yet, the reporters and hosts of the Japanese TV stations focused on the background of Li Yundong and the others. The Japanese press was relatively free, and there was little concealment of Li Yundong's identity and background. However, the indirect impact and loss of Li Yundong and the mystical silver fox, who was related to him, on the Japanese cultivation world in the Battle of Shuya and Mount Tianlong, were kept a secret. Tanaka Misa had also taken a bath early and changed into a beautiful kimono. She followed Isi Chuyun to the Bushen nunnery to wait for the tea party to begin. She was accompanied by the daughters of the major Japanese conglomerates and nobles. They walked together, chattering and guessing the result of the tea party along the way. When they arrived at the Bushen nunnery, they saw the famous masters of the tea ceremony sitting in a row in the corridor at the entrance of the Bushen nunnery. In the lobby next to the Bushen nunnery sat the important figures of the cultivation world. These people were kneeling on the spot, and each of them had an amazing momentum. A group of people looked at them in unison like knives and axes. These noble ladies and childs, who were usually arrogant, were so nervous that they did not dare to breathe. They bowed all the way, walked through the corridor and came to another courtyard. After sitting down, they breathed a sigh of relief. When a gust of wind blew through the hall, they found that their backs were covered with a layer of cold sweat. It was very uncomfortable. Esi Izumo was supposed to sit with Isi Xinguang in the lobby where the cultivation world was located, but she was very close to Tanaka Misa, so she was dragged to sit with the group of noble young masters and young ladies. As soon as the two of them sat down, Tanaka Misa couldn't wait to ask, "Chuyun, who do you think will win this tea battle?" Without thinking, Ai Chuyun immediately said, "Of course, His Highness the Wise King will win." Tanaka Misa asked curiously, "Why?" A young and handsome man next to her couldn't help but interrupt. "Miss Chuyun, you're wrong. So many of us came in just now and we were watched by so many great masters and great craftsmen. Not to mention performing an extremely strict tea ceremony, we can't even breathe normally. I think it's good enough that the Chinese won't be scared to the point of urinating and defecating in such an environment." At this time the others laughed out loud. As soon as they laughed, the other tea ceremony masters and cultivation masters on both sides looked at them, and they were immediately frightened into silence. In Japan, the prestige of the tea ceremony masters and cultivation masters was extremely high. Every move of theirs had unimaginable majesty and aura. When these noble young ladies and young masters entered just now, the great pressure on the field left a very deep impression in their hearts. Many of them had been trained as successors since they were young. They were all people who had experienced great storms and seen the world. To put it bluntly, seeing the emperor every day was as normal as eating and drinking. But when they came in before, it was as if they had entered the gates of hell. They were scared to death. They really couldn't imagine how a person could complete the complicated and strict process of tea battle in such an environment. Perhaps it was lucky that they didn't pee their pants, right? Chapter 981. The man who spoke was called Fujiwara Tengha, a direct descendant of the Fujiwara clan, one of the four most famous aristocratic families in Japan. Izumo looked at Fujiwara Tengha in front of him and sighed in his heart. Fujiwara Tengha had a good appearance. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes, eyes like stars, and a nose like an egg. He was tall and strong, standing at 187 meters tall. He had an innate aristocratic temperament. When he was studying at the University of Tokyo, he had once caused a commotion among all the girls in the school. Although Fujiwara Tengha was not an idiot, he was still far from his ancestor. His ancestor was Fujiwara Bubi, a famous minister during the Great Reform launched by Emperor Xiaoda of Japan. This Fujiwara Bubi was the actual founder of the Fujiwara clan, one of the four most famous aristocratic families in Japan. The Fujiwara clan was also one of the first great families in the cultivation world of Japan. Their ancestors had held the position of great priest for generations. In particular, they once had a marriage alliance with the Tachibana clan, one of the four most famous aristocratic families in Japan. However, it was a pity that the Fujiwara family had now declined. They only had the halo and title of nobility. The three generations of Fujiwara Tianhe were all ordinary people who had never come into contact with cultivation. They only had an empty shell of bright porcelain. But they were still immersed in the glorious history of their family, intoxicated by the intoxicating halo of beauty. They refused to open their eyes to look at the world, acting like they were above their heads. On the surface, Fujiwara Tengha admired Tanaka Misa very much, but in fact he wanted to use Tanaka Misa to strike up a conversation with Ieyasu Izumo. Although he was born into a noble family, and his ancestors had held important positions such as great priest and great priest for generations, the Ieyasu family was also one of the most famous aristocratic families in Japan. In particular, Ieyasu Izumo was known as the most outstanding genius in Japan in the past 200 years. He was also the Xidigarba goddess. Not only was his background no worse than Fujiwara Tenha's, but in terms of cultivation, strength and internal appearance, it was enough to make a man like Fujiwara Tenha feel a sense of admiration. If it were not for this opportunity, he would not have dared to take the initiative to speak to this person who was known as the Ice Mountain treasure of the Japanese cultivation world. Ieyasu Izumo listened to Fujiwara Tenha's words and sighed in his heart. He put his palms together and shook his head. How can a summer insect speak of ice? Fujiwara Tenha's face turned very ugly. He was usually an eloquent person, but at this moment he was choked and speechless. Fujiwara Tenha forced a smile and said, "Chiun, what do you mean by that?" Ieyasu Izumo glanced at Fujiwara Tenha and sighed, "Never underestimate an enemy that hates you, or it will affect your judgment of him. Although in the eyes of many of us, Li Yundong is an enemy of the alien race, you have to admit that his cultivation has reached the level of God. What he can do is not what mortals like you and I can imagine." Ieyasu Izumo was about the same age as these young masters and young ladies, and she was the goddess of the Ieyasu Grand Shrine. Even if she met the Mikado would be very polite to her. Therefore, when she sat among this group of people, she seemed to be the leader. When these words came out, everyone was shocked, even Tanaka Misa. Tanaka Misa knew her best friend's ability best. She said in surprise, "Izumo, if you are also a mortal, then what are we? You are not a mortal, are you?" Everyone agreed when they heard this. Although they were arrogant, they were extremely convinced of Ieyasu Izumo. In their opinion, if Ieyasu Izumo was an ordinary mortal, then what were they? Insects? Aliens? Reptiles? At this time, if someone like Ieyasu Xingguang was here, he might have just laughed it off. However, Ieyasu Izumo was a person who did things her own way. She only cared about what she said and didn't care about what others thought. Thus, she let out a long sigh and said something shocking, "In front of the battler Heavenly Lord, we are all mortals." Battler Qianzuan. Although the young masters and young ladies here didn't know who had given Li Yundong this nickname at this time, they could feel a kind of cold majesty from these four simple words. It was as if he was looking down on the world and it was about to come out. They were all silent and speechless for a long time. The Bus Hen nunnery was originally quiet. The Japanese tea ceremony paid attention to harmony, respect, purity, and silence. The tea ceremony masters here were almost all taciturn. A person could sit in front of a tea set for a whole day just like an eminent monk. Therefore, when they sat in the corridor of the Bus Hen nunnery, they were like a row of sculptures, motionless and not even blinking, let alone whispering to each other. Most of the other leaders of the Japanese cultivation world were the same. Therefore, as soon as these young masters and young ladies quieted down, the whole Bus Hen nunnery immediately fell into silence. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Only the hosts and reporters of the major media outside the Bus Hen nunnery were talking about the situation of the Bus Hen nunnery to the cameras. While it was quiet here, suddenly there was a burst of noise outside. The people in the Bus Hen nunnery could hear the decibels of these hosts and reporters suddenly increase several times. Almost all of them were exclaiming and screaming, and there was a huge noise like a tsunami outside. Most of these noises were the screams of fanatical women. The screams shook the sky and made people stare. The young masters and young ladies in the Bus Hen nunnery stirred and stood up one after another. They couldn't wait to look out and see what was going on outside. The masters of the various schools of tea ceremony sitting in front of the Bus Hen nunnery also leaned forward one after another, their eyes slightly widening. They knew that it must be Li Yundong. Sure enough, it didn't take long for a young man to appear in front of the Bus Hen nunnery. This man's face was like jade, and his skin was as delicate as smooth porcelain. Even looking at him from a distance, one would feel that his body seemed to reflect light, and his whole body was shrouded in a faint halo. It really made the young ladies on the scene palpitate with excitement. Their hearts were beating wildly, and their eyes were staring straight ahead without knowing it. Even Tingyuan Tianhe, who had disapproved of Li Yunyang before, couldn't help but widen his eyes. In terms of appearance and figure, he was almost better than the man in front of him, but this man had an indescribable temperament. He stood there without saying a word, with a slight smile on the corner of his mouth, giving people a feeling of a spring breeze caressing their faces. It made people unable to feel any hostility towards him. Even though he was arrogant and narrow-minded, he couldn't help but feel that he was not as good as him. Even the Chinese exclusion faction of the Japanese cultivation world, who had hated Li Yundong so much before, couldn't help but be tongue-tied when they saw him at this time. They couldn't produce any hatred or anger in their hearts. It was like a raging fire meeting the spring rain, or ice meeting the warm sun. Unknowingly, their anger was dissolved by Li Yundong's faint smile and disappeared without a trace. When a master like Isi Chuyun saw this, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. His Highness Wisdom King's cultivation has already transcended the mortal world and returned to nature. As she was thinking about this, she couldn't help but get up and walk outside. As soon as Isi Chuyun moved, the others in the hall came to their senses. Everyone watched as Isi Chuyun walked to the door of the Bushen nunnery and bowed slightly to Li Yundong. Li Yundong also bowed slightly and returned the salute with a smile. Then she went straight out. Everyone was stunned. Tanaka Misa seemed to have woken up from a dream. She immediately jumped up and chased after him. When she reached the door, she bowed to Li Yundong with a red face. Without waiting for Li Yundong to return the salute, she ran away in a hurry, as if she would be on fire if she stayed any longer. As soon as Tanaka Misa chased after him, she saw countless long and short cameras shining at her. The cameras almost drowned her. Tanaka Misa was shocked. After squeezing out, she grabbed Isi Chuyun's hand and whispered in surprise, "Chuyun, what are you doing? Where are you going?" Si Chuyun said without looking back, "Go back." Tanaka Misa was shocked. "The tea competition hasn't started yet. Where are you going?" Ai Chuyun turned around and shook his head. "No, it's over." Tanaka Misa was stunned. "What do you mean?" Isi Chuyun sighed and said, "Li Yundong's realm has reached the pinnacle, transcended the mortal realm and returned to nature. Although the cultivation of fighting methods and the tea competition are different, the principles are the same. Chen Jingji can't win. The winner of this tea competition has already been decided." As soon as Isi Chuyun finished speaking, there was a huge uproar around. The two of them were talking, but the reporters and hosts next to them heard it clearly. Isi Chuyun could understand Li Yundong's realm, but they might not be able to. It was like people knew that diamonds were precious, but animals regarded them as rubble. These people immediately clamored and pointed their microphones at Isi Izumo. Some of the more radical ones even questioned him face to face. There was a lot of noise outside, so the people in the Bushen nunnery naturally heard it. The faces of the big shots in the cultivation world of Japan changed. No matter what, it was not a glorious thing to be ridiculed and ridiculed by their own people in front of Li Yundong. Moreover, the person who had done this was an important genius in Japan. Even though Chen Jingji had cultivated for many years, his mind had long been as calm as still water. At this time he couldn't help but look angry. He got up, bowed to Li Yundong and made a gesture of invitation with his hand. The Bushen nunnery was not big. After the cultivators, tea ceremony masters, and noble young ladies were all sitting in the lobby, it became a little crowded. Therefore the reporters and hosts of the TV station were not allowed to come in. They were all waiting outside. Only Kay, with his unique conditions and background, had set up a few cameras in the Bushen nunnery for the convenience of the live broadcast. Except for the staff who were on duty, everyone else was driven out. Therefore, although the people outside did not know Chen Jingji's actions, the host in charge of the live broadcast in the TV station shouted loudly, calling it Chen Jingji's declaration of war. The hosts in front of the TV all supported Chen Jingji with righteous indignation. They denounced Isi Chuyun's betrayal and said with certainty, cultivation and the tea ceremony are two completely different worlds. The battle of methods is about profound spiritual energy and powerful magic, while the battle of tea is about tea art. As the saying goes, different professions are like different mountains. Isi Chuyun's words are really inappropriate, childish and ridiculous. At this time, Li Yundong followed Chen Jingji to the tea hall of the Bushen nunnery alone. Chen Jingji bowed slightly and said in a deep voice, "Mr. Li, please show us the Chinese tea ceremony." He wanted Li Yundong to show his tea art first. He was a great master in the tea ceremony world of Japan and even the world. It could be said that he stood at the peak of the world's tea ceremony. If he made a move first, the people who came later basically had no chance of winning. It could be said that they would be suppressed by his momentum and not be able to exert their normal strength at all. Therefore he took the initiative to suggest that Li Yundong go first, which could be regarded as a show of strength. But unexpectedly, Li Yundong smiled slightly, bowed politely and said, "I dare not. As the saying goes, a guest should follow the host's wishes. Please go first because I'm afraid that after I make the tea, you won't dare to make a move." This sentence immediately caused an uproar in the crowd. Everyone stood up immediately. Chen Jingji was even more shocked and angry. The host in the TV was dumbfounded and almost couldn't believe his ears. No one in the world had ever dared to say such a thing in front of Chen Lixio's descendants. The young man in front of them was the first. Was there anyone more arrogant than him in this world? Many Japanese viewers in front of the TV were stunned for a while, and then they were all furious. They all scolded, "Go eat shit. Lord Qian Jingji, teach this arrogant bastard a lesson." I still didn't have time to update before Christmas. I'm sorry to all my readers and wish you a late Christmas. Did you have a happy Christmas? I hope that you can be so happy every day in the future. In addition, I haven't seen the cover every day recently. There are chapters everywhere. I spent a lot of money. Finally, let me say something else. Haruba Asakura dance, hello, hihi. Chapter 982. Long Yuan Xingshue's words angered almost all the Japanese people in front of the TV. Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, Xinhuan Kai, and Xin Hui immediately felt the great changes around them. Xin Hui and Xinhuan Kai were different from Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin. She was just an ordinary person. Although she was a real rich second-generation young lady, she had not experienced many storms and waves. Although Xinhuan Kai had experienced a lot of storms and waves, there were many tea ceremony grandmasters and leaders of various sects in the cultivation world around him. Even though he was a business tycoon, he could not bear such strong pressure. For a moment, his chest felt stuffy, as if there was a huge rock weighing 10,000 kilograms on his body, and he could not breathe. Xin Hui was even more unbearable. Her pretty face turned purple and red. It was Ziyuan, who was beside her, who reached out and pressed her shoulder, that she breathed a sigh of relief. Su Chan and the others were only allowed to enter the nunnery. They looked into the distance from the porch at the entrance. They saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged in the hall of the nunnery, motionless. Qian Jingji leaned forward slightly and said angrily, "Mr. Li, I don't think this is the etiquette of the great Chinese, is it?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "The most basic premise of the so-called etiquette is honesty. Treating others with sincerity is the way to treat others. I'm just telling you my inner thoughts. How is that impolite?" His words were very sincere, but it was like adding oil to the fire, causing many Japanese to shout. The national pride of the Japanese was sometimes very fragile. Being provoked by Li Yundong like this, many people immediately jumped up. Even some tea ceremony masters couldn't hold back and cursed him repeatedly. Xinhuan Kai and Xin Hui were watching from the side with worried faces. They didn't know how Li Yundong would fight in such a hostile environment, but Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin suddenly understood at the same time, and then they were overjoyed. Xin Hui saw this and couldn't help but ask Zhou Qin, what are you so happy about? I was scared to death. Zhou Qin lowered her voice as if she was afraid that the people around her would hear her. She whispered, "This is Master's provocation." The Japanese tea ceremony pays attention to the 4 key words of harmony, respect, purity, and silence. Only when these 4 words are achieved can it be called the real Japanese tea ceremony. Look at Qian Jingji now. He doesn't even have the words peaceful and quiet anymore. Xin Hui suddenly understood. "Ah," she asked in a low voice with some excitement, "then does Li Yundong have a good chance of winning?" Xinhuan Kai turned his head and glared at his daughter. He scolded her in a low voice, "You're so rude. How can you call someone like that?" He, an old man with gray hair, had to call Li Yundong master, but his daughter called him by his name. What kind of logic was this? Xin Hui stuck out her tongue, tilted her head, and looked at Ziyuan and the others with hope. Ziyuan nodded slightly and said in a low voice, "In theory, but I don't think Qian Jingji will be so easily provoked. Otherwise, he won't be qualified to ascend to the peak of the Japanese tea ceremony." After Ziyuan said this, Qian Jingji slowly sat up straight. The anger on his face disappeared little by little. He nodded slowly and said, "Since Mr. Li is so honest, I understand. I will do my best to defeat you. This is also my way of being honest." Li Yundong chuckled and stretched out his hand to make a gesture. "Please?" His movements were relaxed and natural, as if he were at home, not at all like he was in a wolf's den full of hostility. Qian Jingji took a deep look at Li Yundong. As a half-cultivator who had close contact with the cultivation world, he naturally knew the horror of the man in front of him. After he sat down, he took a deep breath, and the anger on his face slowly subsided. His aura was as calm as an ancient well, extremely clear, but at the same time so deep that the bottom could not be seen. After making a gesture of please, Qian Jingji stood up, walked to the door and bowed to the lobby, the surroundings and the direction of the cameras. At this moment, the Bushen nunnery immediately quieted down. This place represented the holy land of Japanese tea ceremony. When the 16th generation of Qian Rixiu's descendants were about to have a tea battle, Even the angry Japanese could feel the influence of Qian Jingji's peaceful and quiet aura. After Qian Jingji bowed, he walked into the room. Every step was delicate and light, like a dance, with a strong sense of rhythm and elegance. Su Chan and the others saw that Qian Jingji was obviously a man over 50 years old, but his every move revealed an extremely elegant beauty, which was pleasing to the eye. Qian Jingji came to the tea table, carefully lit the charcoal fire, and began to boil water. At this time he didn't move much, just quietly waiting for the tea to boil. Ziyuan stared at the field and suddenly said in a low voice, "Oh no, we still lack a very important thing." Chen Wankai and Shen Hui turned their heads and said in unison, "What?" At this time, Su Chan and Zhou Qin had some understanding, and they whispered together, "Tea?" After all, Chen Wankai was a person who had seen the world and he was a big expert in collecting things. With a light tap from Ziyuan, he understood and hit his palm with his fist. Damn it! How could I forget this? Although Shen Hui still didn't know the specific situation, she was smart and vaguely guessed a little. She tentatively said, "Is it because the tea made from different water is different?" Ziyuan nodded and said in a low voice, "That's right." In ancient times, in order to make a pot of good tea, the royal family sometimes even specially fetched water from thousands of miles away, or filtered the water from melted snow for thousands of years and brewed it as tea. She looked worriedly at the tea in front of Chen Jingji and whispered, "I don't know what kind of tea they have prepared for this tea battle." While they were whispering to each other, many people next to them turned their heads and glared at them. Obviously, they were dissatisfied and indignant that they were whispering to each other while a great grandmaster like Chen Jingji was performing a tea ceremony. Just as Ziyuan and the others were whispering, the tea in front of Chen Jingji was gradually steaming. He slowly opened the tea box in front of him and took out a small black round cake. As soon as the small round cake was taken out, there was a low exclamation in the Bushen nunnery. Many tea ceremony masters, who had been so calm that they hadn't been moved by Li Yundong's provocative words before, couldn't help but lean forward and widen their eyes at this time. Ziyuan looked at the small black cake in Chen Jingji's hand with her mouth agape and said in a daze, "This is impossible." Chen Wankai couldn't help asking, "What is this?" Ziyuan said in shock, "This is Longyuan Xingxue from the Dragon and Phoenix Tea Group." Dragon and Phoenix Tea Group? Zhou Qin and Shen Hui asked in confusion, "What is the Dragon and Phoenix Tea Group? Is it rare? Is it rarer than the mother tree de Hong Pao? What is Longyuan Xingxue?" Su Chan also looked at Ziyuan in confusion. As a cultivator, she had even seen a powerful magical weapon like the flipping sky seal. Was there anything in the world that could shock people like this? Ziyuan was also a knowledgeable person. Although she had never seen the flipping sky seal, she had seen powerful magical weapons like the immortal pen and the medicine king tripod every day. Why was she so surprised by a Dragon and Phoenix Tea Group? Seeing that they were at a loss, Ziyuan smiled bitterly in her heart. She said in a low voice, "The Dragon and Phoenix Tea Group is the king of tea, and it has been lost for 500 or 600 years. The tea we drink now is actually loose tea. This kind of tea is picked from the tea tree and kneaded and processed. During the Han Dynasty, Zhang Ji's Guangya proposed to process tea and make tea cakes. This situation lasted until the Song Dynasty. The whole country was rich, and the whole country was enthusiastic about the tea ceremony. The production of tea groups reached its peak, among which the Dragon and Phoenix Tea Group was the most famous. This kind of tea group is extremely rare, and it has always been offered only to the emperor. Even the royal family begged the emperor for it, but the emperor was reluctant to give it to them. He was even reluctant to drink it himself. Only when there was a sacrifice in the ancestral temple would he be willing to take out a little. Ouyang Xiu served as an official in the court for 20 years, and then he was rewarded by Song Renzong with a Dragon and Phoenix Tea Group. At that time, Ouyang Xiu was the Minister of Justice and the Minister of War. Such positions were equivalent to the President of the Supreme People's Court, the Procurator General of the Supreme People's Procuratorate, the Minister of Justice, the head of the Law Interpretation Committee, and the Director of the Constitutional Protection Committee, and the Minister of Defense, the Director of the National Mobilization Committee, the leader of the Commission of Science, Technology and Industry for National Defense, and the commander of the China People's Armed Police Force and the Minister of Public Security. Such a position could be said to be of high status and great power, but even with such a status, he was never willing to take out the Dragon and Phoenix tea ball to drink. He would only take it out when guests came to pass it around for everyone to have a look and show off. Chen Wansai's ancestors were all farmers. Only his generation could be considered to have made a fortune and lived a life of luxury. Naturally, he knew the truth of the saying, as an official for 3 generations, you know what to wear and eat. There was an old saying that it took 3 generations to cultivate a noble. It referred to the accumulation of food and living habits over a long period of time, slowly turning into a kind of noble culture. This was far from something that could be learned by a nouveau riche wearing a crown. Chen Wankai knew that his roots were shallow, and he wanted to become a noble and create a noble family with endless incense. Therefore he was very particular about living. But at this time, he heard that the emperor was reluctant to drink a piece of dragon and phoenix tea group. He only took out a little when there was a sacrifice in the ancestral temple. Ouyang Xiao, who was so powerful, did not even dare to drink it. When guests came, they just looked at it as if they were drawing cakes to appease their hunger. What kind of concept was this? Su Chan, Shen Hui, and Zhou Qin, who came from the 2nd generation of officials, all widened their eyes in shock. Su Chan said, "Then what is the Dragon Garden Xingxue of the Dragon and Phoenix Tea Group?" Ziyuan shook her head with a look of disbelief on her face and continued, "In the Northern Song Dynasty, the tea competition in China reached its peak. According to the record of Xuanhe Beiyuan tribute tea written by Xiong Fan, the tea groups were replaced by Jing Ding, Stone Milk, White Milk, and then by the Big Dragon and Phoenix Group. The Big Dragon and Phoenix Group was replaced by the Little Dragon and Phoenix Group, and the Little Dragon and Phoenix Group was replaced by the Miyun Dragon Group, and then the Miyun Dragon Group was replaced by the Rueyun Soaring Dragon Group, and then the Rueyun Soaring Dragon Group was replaced by the White Tea Group." Ziyuan turned her head and looked at the Dragon Garden Xingxue in Chen Jingji's hands with great shock. She murmured, "Zheng Kejian only used silver water sprout to make the Dragon Garden Xingxue. In the record of Beiyuan tribute tea, tea leaves are divided into 3 grades: purple buds, medium buds, and small buds. The Dragon Garden Xingxue abandoned the purple buds and only picked the small tea tips of the best new tea. Only tea tips shaped like sparrow's tongue, like eagle's claws, and as small as a needle can be called water sprout. In Xiong Fan's record of Xuanhe Beiyuan tribute tea, the medium buds and small buds are all rare and top grade. As for the water sprout, it has never been heard of since ancient times. Look at the Dragon Garden Xingxue in Chen Jingji's hands. It is made of this kind of water sprout that has never been heard of since ancient times. In the process of making it, it is steamed first. After steaming, the ripe buds that have been picked are removed, only the heart is taken, and it is hidden in a precious spring. It is bright and clean like a silver thread. It is made of a new square inch with a small dragon winding on it. It is called Dragon Garden Xingxue." Shen Wankai, Shen Hui, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin were all stunned by Ziyuan's explanation. Shen Hui looked down at the top-grade mother tree Dahong Pao in her hand and stammered, "Then how many Dragon Garden Xingxue can the Dahong Pao in my hand make?" Ziyuan raised a finger. Su Chan couldn't help but ask, "1? Impossible, half?" Zhou Qin said, "It can't be a small half, can it? Is it possible that there is not even a small half? 1 or 2? 1 cent? It can't be 1 cent, can it?" Ziyuan kept shaking her head and finally said slowly, "I've seen the mother tree Dahong Pao before. There is only 1 tea leaf that is qualified to make Dragon Garden Xingxue. Moreover, only the tip of this tea leaf has to be taken. After it is steamed, it can be decided whether to use it or not." After hearing this, Su Chan and the others were all stunned. Shen Wankai had thought that it was an extremely awesome thing for him to be able to get the mother tree Dahong Pao, which was dozens of times more expensive than gold, in such a hurry. He couldn't help but feel proud in his heart. But at this time, looking at the mother tree Dahong Pao again, he suddenly felt that it was like dung. Su Chan and the others were dumbfounded as they watched Chen Jingji slowly peel off the Dragon Garden Xingxue bit by bit, grind it, and then make tea. They couldn't help but think in their hearts, how much manpower and material resources did it take to make such a small piece of Dragon Garden Xingxue? Ouyang Xiao was already ecstatic when he got a piece of Dragon and Phoenix tea ball. He didn't dare to try it himself. There was a distinguished guest, so he passed it on for fun. What kind of sacred tea would this Dragon Garden Xingxue, which was 2 grades higher than the Dragon and Phoenix tea ball? This was simply unimaginable. For a moment, the Bushen nunnery was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Only the gentle and leisurely sound of tea could be heard. Chen Jingji elegantly put the crushed and brewed tea leaves into the famous tea set, 1,000 eggplants, and soaked them in boiling water. Immediately, white steam rose in the Bushen nunnery, and dragons and phoenixes could faintly be seen flying in the mist. The mist was white and fragrant. It was really the Dragon Garden Xingxue, with dragons and phoenixes dancing. What are you doing? Chapter 983. No one had expected that Longyuan Xingxue, the pinnacle of Chinese tea history, would reappear in the hands of Qian Jingji. Anyone who knew Longyuan Xingxue could not imagine how much money and financial resources it would take to make such a small piece of seemingly inconspicuous tea. Most importantly, it was not something that could be done with money alone. In the Song dynasty, because of the tea competition, the whole country was extravagant, especially in the making of dragon and phoenix tea balls. Often, only 1 or 2 top-grade tea leaves could be selected from 10,000 caddies of top-grade tea, and many of them would be eliminated. In the end, there would often be a serious waste. This situation greatly increased the living burden of the people. Therefore, after the fall of the Song dynasty and the short-lived Yuan dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang, who was born a poor farmer, knew the suffering of the people and specially ordered the abolition of the tea competition. Because of this, the grand occasion of the tea competition gradually disappeared in China and only existed in Japan. In particular, the dragon and phoenix tea balls, which had risen because of the tea competition, and the pinnacle of the tea balls, Longyuan Xingxue, had also been annihilated in the long river of history. It was not until today that it reappeared in the world. When the tea ceremony masters of other schools in Japan saw Qian Jingji take out the Longyuan Xingxue, some of them were so excited that they even stood up absent-mindedly. Especially when Qian Jingji boiled the tea, the white mist in the teapot boiled like dragons and phoenixes. The clouds in the Bushen nunnery were rosy. When the sun shone outside, it was really like a rainbow hanging in the sky, magnificent and magical. Some of them even burst into tears and wished they could taste the legendary tea Longyuan Xingxue. Before Qian Jingji took out the Longyuan Xingxue, Ziyuan and the others looked at the wonders in the tea garden of the Bushen nunnery, and their hearts were cold. Before Qian Jingji took out the Longyuan Xingxue, Ziyuan still had a glimmer of hope in her heart. But after Qian Jingji took out the Longyuan Xingxue, she knew that there was almost no chance of winning or meaning in this tea competition. What was the purpose of the tea competition? First of all, there were strict requirements for the ingredients, utensils, and cooking methods. Then there was the quality of the tea, then the quality of the water, and finally the techniques. During the Song dynasty, the standard to determine the winner of a tea duel was, the one with a bright white complexion and no trace of water in the cup was the best. In the Jianan tea duel, the one with the first trace of water was the loser, and the one with the longest endurance was the winner. In other words, the most important aspects in a tea duel were the color of the tea, which depended on the hard skills of the equipment, the quality of the tea, the quality of the water, the charcoal, the control of the heat, and so on. The second was the trace of water, which depended on the exquisite tea skills of the tea duelists, and so on. Often, in a tea battle, if the powerful tea ceremony grandmasters couldn't decide the winner in 1 round, they would have to win 2 out of 3 rounds. The first to show the water mark would be the loser. However, how could Qian Jingji, who had spent his entire life dealing with tea and studying the art of tea, make a mistake? Everyone saw that his movements were slow and light, like a dancer slowly dancing. His movements were not only accurate but also elegant. Especially when dividing the tea, his grasp of strength had reached a subtle state. In terms of cultivation, Qian Jingji couldn't compare with Li Yundong, but anyone who specialized in one thing for a lifetime could often reach the pinnacle. It was like the oil seller who could skillfully pour oil into the money hole, which was admirable, but he revealed the secret of heaven with 1 sentence. There was no other, only the hands were familiar with the ears. This was the truth that practice makes perfect. Qian Jingji had been thinking about how to make tea and how to study the art of tea all his life. He could really divide the tea perfectly with his eyes closed. Ziyuan saw that when he was dividing the tea, the eggplant in his hand was sometimes high and sometimes low. The tea in the pot poured down like a silver chain like a long dragon, but when it fell on the rabbit hair cup, it did not cause any splash, nor did it leave a trace of water. In the eyes of others, it was really a wonderful skill. Ziyuan was still hoping that he would make some mistakes in the most difficult part of dividing the tea. Seeing the old man's steady movements and posture, her heart sank to the bottom. When Qian Jingji finished dividing the tea, everyone immediately burst into thunderous cheers. Qian Jingji put the eggplant in front of him, made a gesture to Li Yundong, and then made a gesture to the judges in the tea hall of the Bushen nunnery. These judges were all so excited that they couldn't speak. First, an old man said with tears in his eyes, Lord Qian Jingji's tea, water, utensils, and art all represent the pinnacle of the world's tea ceremony. We have seen it today and we have not lived in vain. We have not lived in vain. The others also agreed and looked at Li Yundong with a strange look as if to say, Why are you still so thick-skinned to stay here? Are you waiting to be humiliated? In this world, the few Qianzhengxi have already reached their limits. Could it be that you can still break through this limit? Really, let's go. What a shame. Li Yundong didn't seem to understand their gazes. He just looked at Chen Jingji with a slight smile and applauded gently. In all fairness, Chen Jingji's attainments in the tea ceremony had reached the extreme realm that a master of the tea ceremony could reach. His every move was like a precise measurement, reaching a level that could not be perfectly imitated by machines. The most valuable thing was that in such an extremely precise and almost mechanical process, he could still perfectly embody the four-character realm of harmony, respect and silence in the Japanese tea ceremony. He deserved to be called a master. Out of respect for the old man in front of him in the tea ceremony, Li Yundong had to express his respect by applauding. When Chen Jingji saw Li Yundong applauding, there was finally a smile on his face. He bowed slightly and said, "Mr. Li, do you still want to continue the tea battle?" In his opinion, this tea battle was meaningless. As the leader of the Chen family, he often had to face challenges from various schools of tea ceremony, as well as from the Chen family and the Li family and the Chen family in the martial arts circle. Although the three schools were all passed down from Chen Rixiu, like three sons sharing the same father and mother, and although they were all passed down from the same source, they had set up their own sects and fought openly and secretly in private, which had not stopped for hundreds of years. In order to cope with such continuous challenges, the Chen family took advantage of the opportunity of serving the nobles and secretly began to make Longyuan Xingxue, which was the peak of the tea ceremony, in order to completely defeat all the opponents of the Chen family in one fell swoop on an occasion, so that they would never dare to covet their throne in the future. This small black tea cake could be said to have consumed the savings of several generations of the Chen family. Now that it was taken out, it really had the power to conquer the country. Chen Jingji himself couldn't imagine how Li Yundong would defeat him. However, Li Yundong smiled slightly and said to Chen Jingji, "Of course. Lord Chen Jingji has let me see the beauty of the Japanese tea ceremony, but I also want to let Lord Chen Jingji see the so-called true meaning of the tea ceremony." Chen Jingji was surprised and then became displeased. He had been immersed in the tea ceremony for decades, and his family had been tea ceremony masters for generations. It could be said that his family had a long history of knowledge. His status in the tea ceremony was higher than that of all the students, but the young man in front of him, who didn't even have a few hairs on his mouth, was actually teaching people. It was really unpleasant to listen to. It was as if a young man who had just started cultivating had pulled on Celestial Master Zhang's sleeve and boasted shamelessly, "Hey, ox-nosed old man, watch me teach you what real cultivation is." This was simply a joke to all the cultivators in the world. Li Yundong, you may have reached the peak of cultivation, but although there are similarities between cultivation and the tea ceremony, they are two different paths after all. As the saying goes, different professions are like different mountains. It's not something that can be passed just by talking. Chen Jingji's cultivation was also excellent. Although he was unhappy, he still made a polite gesture of invitation. Li Yundong didn't stand on ceremony. Then he waved to Shen Hui, who was holding a teapot, and Su Chan, who was holding a tea set. Su Chan and Shen Hui stepped forward and walked straight into the tea hall of the Bushen nunnery. They placed the tea set and the teapot in front of Li Yundong. Although Shen Hui had participated in the tea culture and art competition in Dongwu City, compared with the one in front of her, it was like a child playing house. She usually had a bad temper, but here she didn't even dare to breathe, let alone speak. However, Su Chan boldly asked in a low voice, "Yundong, can you win?" Li Yundong gave her a gentle smile and said, "You watch from the side." As he said this, he sat down cross-legged. Without any process of the tea ceremony, he reached out and opened the teapot. He reached out and took out the tea leaves of the mother tree, Dahongpo. He casually took a tea leaf, which happened to be the only one that was qualified to be selected as the Longyuan Xingxue. Li Yundong threw the tea leaf into the teacup and poured some water into the teapot beside him. A Dahongpo tea leaf floated up from the teacup. When the other people in the Bushen nunnery saw that Li Yundong didn't have any rules of the tea ceremony at all, and didn't even know how to choose tea, how to make tea, and the order of tea, they immediately burst into laughter. Some of them even started to sneer at him on the spot. Su Chan couldn't help glaring at these people, but Li Yundong turned a deaf ear to them. He pressed his hands on his knees and looked at the teacup in front of him with a smile. Then he pouted at Shen Hui and motioned for her to light the fire to boil the water. Shen Hui was so frightened by the ridicule around her that her face turned pale. She didn't dare to move. Li Yundong smiled at her and said, "It's okay. Just boil the water. Shen Hui saw that his smile was extremely warm, as if it was revealing a force, which suddenly made her heart double. Somehow she calmed down, so she boldly sat down beside him and boiled the water. When the other Japanese saw this, they thought it was ridiculous to the extreme. They had never heard of someone helping them in the tea ceremony. For a moment, the sarcastic laughter became louder and louder. Shen Hui was boiling water while secretly looking at the boy beside her. When she first saw him, he was still in a clothing store. The sex fiend she had misunderstood at that time had now grown into a person who could face the ridicule of so many great masters and craftsmen without changing his expression. He was a person who was calm and indifferent. For a moment, Shen Hui's imagination ran wild, but she suddenly heard that the laughter in the nunnery had suddenly become much quieter. She couldn't help but come back to her senses and look, but she immediately widened her eyes and looked at Li Yundong in front of her with a dumbfounded expression. The tea leaf in the teacup in front of Li Yundong had sprouted and grown by itself. After a while, it had grown into a pocket-sized tea tree in front of Li Yundong. It was obviously a Dahongpo tea tree. The buds on the tea tree were green and tender, as if they were jade buds. It made people want to go forward and touch them to see if they were real. Everyone in the nunnery was stunned. They saw Li Yundong reach out and pick about a dozen tea leaves from the tea tree. With a wave of his hand, the tea tree aged and withered rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then it died and finally turned into a pool of ashes. Li Yundong wiped it with his hand and it disappeared. At this time, the tea next to him had also been boiled. Li Yundong picked up the kettle and poured the tea leaves in the teacup. As he poured the tea, not to mention the water stains, even the water stains splashed out and dripped on the table. According to the rules of the tea competition, he could be directly judged to have lost. However, Li Yundong's expression was calm. After making the tea, he gently fanned his hand over the steam coming out of the teacup. Immediately, the whole nunnery felt a burst of tea fragrance, elegant and fragrant, intoxicating people. Chen Jingji saw that Li Yundong had finished drinking the tea and was sitting there calmly, sipping tea by himself. He asked in surprise and doubt, "Mr. Li, is this your tea ceremony?" Li Yundong took a sip of tea, put down the teacup, laughed and said, "No, this should be your tea ceremony." As soon as he said this, someone around immediately shouted, "Nonsense, how is this our tea ceremony? You ignorant boy, don't embarrass yourself here." Li Yundong smiled and looked in the direction of the voice, then said to Chen Jingji, "Lord Chen Jingji, have you heard of a poem?" Chen Jingji frowned and asked, "What poem?" Li Yundong immediately patted the table and recited, "Boil the water, add the tea leaves, and then drink the tea in the right way. That's all you need to know. Apart from that, the tea has nothing." As soon as Li Yundong recited this poem, the sarcasm and scolding around him suddenly stopped, and almost all the Japanese people looked at each other. Chen Jingji stood there dumbfounded. Of course he knew this poem. This poem not only described the highest realm of the tea ceremony in plain language, but the most important thing was, it was made by Chen Jingji's ancestor, Chen Rixiu. Chen Jingji suddenly realized a terrible problem. If he refuted this poem, he would refute his ancestors, refute the supreme tea sage of Japan, and even oppose the Japanese tea ceremony. But if he didn't refute this poem, he would agree that what Li Yundong did was the real tea ceremony, which was tantamount to admitting defeat. Chen Jingji was not the only one who realized this. Almost all the Japanese who saw this scene realized this. The tea fight, which was supposed to have no suspense, suddenly took a dramatic turn, which stunned them. Many people cursed in their hearts, F***CKU. I've seen shameless people, but I've never seen someone so shameless that he doesn't even use his ancestors as a gun. Did Lord Chen Rixiu provoke you? I was really shot lying down. == 4,000 words. After finishing the work at hand in the past 2 days, I've been focusing on getting rid of the jet lag all day. Last night I lay in bed and didn't sleep all night. I got up as soon as possible and yawned. Hurry up and don't wait at night. There must be no one. I'll go to bed early and get rid of the jet lag quickly. I can't afford to stay up all night. I'm old and staying up all night is definitely not suitable for me. Amit Ba. Chapter 984. The words of Li Yundong, who was in the sage realm, made the front of the Bushen nunnery fall silent. Many Japanese who were watching the live broadcast in front of the TV also stared blankly. They had never expected that Li Yundong would recite such a poem at this time. This poem was like a big killing weapon, a trump card heavily stabbing the hearts of all Japanese. After Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Shen Hui and Chen Wankai heard Li Yundong's words, the scene immediately became dead silent. The surrounding Japanese people looked as if they had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Their eyes bulged out, and their mouths opened so wide that their jaws were about to fall to the ground. Su Chan and Shen Hui were standing next to Li Yunyang, so they were too embarrassed to ask more, but Shen Wankai and Zhou Qin couldn't help but turn to look at the knowledgeable Zi Yuan. Zhou Qin widened her eyes and said, "What did Master say just now? What's wrong with these Japanese?" At this time, Zi Yuan's face was also full of shock. She subconsciously whispered, "Yes, why didn't I think of this?" After Zhou Qin repeated her words, she seemed to wake up from a dream and said, You mean what Li Yundong said just now? That's Senrikyu's poem." Zhou Qin was puzzled, so she asked for more details and Zi Yuan explained. As the famous tea sage of country R. Chen Rixiu played an important role in the tea industry and history of country R. Even in the whole world, his contribution and status to the tea culture and history could not be erased and doubted. Even the most extreme nationalists would have a lot of respect for this tea master and eminent monk as long as they truly understood Chen Rixiu's life. Chen Rixiu was a late bloomer. He only became Oda Nobunaga's head of tea at the age of 52. As a result, he stepped onto the political stage of Japan, and his fate took a huge turn. Later, Oda Nobunaga encountered the Hinoji incident, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi took over the world. Chen Rixiu also began his golden 15 years of glory. During these 15 years, Chen Rixiu's tea ceremony realm climbed to the peak, the realm of returning to nature. At that time, there were people who admired Chen Rixiu and wanted to learn the profound meaning of the tea ceremony. Chen Rixiu told them, "The tea ceremony is to put charcoal in the stove, wait for the water to boil to the right degree, and add tea leaves to create the right taste. Put the flowers in the vase according to their growing condition. In summer it makes one think of coolness, in winter it makes one think of warmth. There is no other secret." Zhou Qin and Chen Wankai listened to Zi Yuan's whispered and quick explanation, and they couldn't help but admire Chen Rixiu. One of them was a leader in the cultivation world, and the other was a business tycoon. Both of them were wise people who could see through the essence of the prosperous world at a glance. Naturally, they knew that a high-ranking person with infinite glory could see through this point and put it into practice showed that he had indeed seen through the false prosperity of the world, returned to the essence of Tao, and reached the realm of returning to nature. If the way of tea was like cultivation and had 9 heavens, then Chen Rixiu would definitely be a golden immortal expert at the 9th heavenly stage. Unfortunately, he wasn't a cultivation expert. Thus, Toyotomi Hideyoshi was jealous of his astonishing prestige and eventually sentenced him to death with a groundless crime. They could understand Chen Rixiu's understanding of the tea ceremony, and these Japanese naturally understood it. Although Chen Rixiu had mentioned this, it was easier to know than to do. Most of the time a person knew this truth, but it did not mean that he could do it. Being able to do it did not mean that he really understood all of this. The realm was very mysterious. If you understood it, you understood it. If you didn't understand it, you didn't understand it. Those who understood it would reveal a charm that was beyond the reach of others in every move. Those who didn't understand it would be as stupid and ridiculous as clowns if they pretended to understand it. When Chen Rixiu said these words in front of everyone, these people would sigh and say, "Lord Chen Rixiu's realm is beyond our reach." But if it was someone else, these people would definitely scold him in front of his face, "Don't be pretentious or you will be struck by lightning." However, when Li Yundong said these words, some people were ecstatic in their hearts, but some people were moved and some even looked thoughtful. When Chen Jingji heard Li Yundong's words, he was the one who was touched the most. However, as a descendant of Chen Rixiu, he always wanted to understand Chen Rixiu's realm. However, the understanding of the realm was not only related to talent, but also to status and experience. Chen Jingji could understand what Li Yundong had said, but he didn't believe that Li Yundong had understood such a realm, because the level of fighting strength and the level of the spiritual realm were not necessarily proportional to the logical relationship. In the history of Japan, there were many masters who were strong in fighting, but their spiritual realm was extremely low. Chen Jingji frowned and said to Li Yundong with great displeasure, "Mr. Li, you want to make a comeback by quoting the ancestors' words. Isn't it too childish?" Li Yundong looked at Chen Jingji calmly. He sighed slowly and said, "Lord Chen Jingji, do you really think that I am so eager to win this tea competition?" Chen Jingji was stunned and looked at Li Yundong blankly. Li Yundong shook his head, looked at Chen Jingji with a disappointed look, and said, "As a tea ceremony master, I deeply admire Chen Rixiu's understanding of the tea ceremony and the realm he has reached. He is a master who has understood the meaning of life and death and the universe. Unfortunately, his descendants are obsessed with vanity and prosperity. They are fools who ignore the invisible great way. Qian Jingji was suddenly shocked by this scolding. As the saying goes, the greatest sound is silent, and the great way is invisible. The highest realm of any Taoism in the world is the simplest. For example, the realm of the unity of heaven and man that Li Yundong had comprehended. What was the unity of heaven and man? Since ancient times, countless people had wanted to explain these 4 words. They had used countless words and works, and they were piled up like a mountain. In fact, these 4 words were simply one sentence: the harmony and unity of the human body's own small universe and the universe of heaven and earth. But if ordinary people heard this sentence, they would scoff at it. Bullshit, it's as good as not saying it. I've known it for hundreds of years. It was like someone went to ask Chen Rixiu for advice on the mystery of the tea ceremony. Chen Rixiu told them that the tea ceremony was to make delicious tea, and then he was spurned by them. Since ancient times, whether it was in the cultivation world, the martial arts world, the tea ceremony world, or the art world, there had always been a universal sentence that was applicable everywhere. This saying was, "A single sentence of truth, 10,000 books of falsehood." In ancient times, when many martial arts masters and cultivators taught their disciples, they would often personally teach them martial arts moves. Only when they were on the verge of death would they call their direct disciples to their bedside and say to them, "I'll tell you everything I've learned in my life. Come closer, I'll tell you." This was the true knowledge that had been passed down by word of mouth since ancient times, and it was often just one sentence. But when the disciples heard it, they would often be enlightened. So that's it. So it's so simple? Such a great truth was often the simplest and easiest thing to understand in the world. But if it was too easy, the disciples often didn't take it seriously and thought that the master was unreliable. How could such a simple truth be the true method? If you don't believe it, you must have hidden it. Therefore, there was a saying in the cultivation world and the martial arts world: the great way was easy to find, but the small skills were hard to find. This was because the great way was actually something that everyone in the world could touch, but only a few great masters and great craftsmen could comprehend something that belonged to them from the simplest things in the world. These things were what made them different from mortals. These things were collectively known as realm. When Ziyuan heard Li Yundong say the true meaning of Chen Rixiu's tea ceremony, she was also greatly shocked. These days she had been worried that Li Yundong would lose in the tea competition. In order to increase Li Yundong's chances of winning, she couldn't eat or sleep at night. But in the end, she didn't expect that Li Yundong would use such a simple method to defeat Qian Jingji, who had Longyuan Xingxue. In an instant, Ziyuan remembered that when she was teaching Li Yundong to learn cultivation, she had told him that there was a supreme cultivation book in the cultivation world. This book was the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor, which could be bought in any Xinhua bookstore. Ziyuan clearly remembered that when Li Yundong heard this sentence, his eyes almost fell out of his eye sockets because he couldn't believe that such a mysterious supreme book in the cultivation world was actually the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor, which was sold everywhere in Xinhua bookstore. At this moment, Ziyuan suddenly comprehended the invisible profound meaning of the Great Way. She fell into a wonderful realm. This kind of realm could not be explained clearly. It was like a person who had not been breathing smoothly for a long time. Suddenly, the aura of the whole body was integrated in an instant. It was extremely carefree, comfortable, and natural. In the past, Ziyuan had enlightened Li Yundong's way of cultivation, but she hadn't expected that now, it was Li Yundong who had enlightened her way of cultivation. She smiled slightly. Her smile was gentle, like a spring flower blooming. At this time, Qian Jingji was also similar to Ziyuan. Ziyuan had taught Li Yundong about the true meaning and truth of the Great Way before. She understood these truths, but understanding and understanding were two different things. It was like she had a seed buried in her heart. She knew where they were, but she didn't know when they would germinate and take root. Qian Jingji was the same. He had known what kind of realm his ancestor Qian Lixio had reached since he was a child. He knew where this realm was, but he had never been able to touch it. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't reach it. However, Li Yundong's words suddenly made him touch the threshold of this realm. He seemed to have come to a new world. Although everything was still in front of him, it seemed that everything was different from everything before. He couldn't tell what was different and what was different. Just as Qian Jingji's mouth was wide open and he was deep in thought, Tingyuan Tianhe, who was in the lobby next to him, couldn't bear it anymore. In his opinion, Li Yundong was a fraud. He couldn't help pointing at Li Yundong and scolding him loudly, "You don't even know the most basic tea ceremony. What right do you have to point fingers here and make irresponsible remarks? It's ridiculous. Li Yundong didn't get angry. He turned his head and asked curiously, "Do you know what tea ceremony is?" Tingyuan Tianhe was speechless. Soon, he became angry out of shame and said, "Do you know?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "There are countless roads in the world, but as the saying goes, all roads lead to Rome. Although each road passes through different places, and the width and length of the road are different, their final destination is the same. When you reach the end of a road, you will know what all the roads in the world are about when you look back. This is the truth that the Tao is interconnected, the Tao is of the same origin, all methods belong to the same origin, and heaven and man are one." If Li Yundong's words were heard by ordinary people, it would be nonsense. Tingyuan Tianhe snorted when he heard them, but when it came to people with high aspirations such as a master craftsman like Qian Jingji, it was like a clap of thunder in their ears. It was deafening. It wasn't that he didn't understand, but that he was on the verge of touching this realm. Suddenly, Li Yundong pushed him from the side and let him completely enter this realm. Qian Jingji's body shook violently, and he couldn't help but burst into tears. He raised his head and sighed. So that's how it is. Not only him but also Ayase Izumo, who had concluded that the tea fight was over, did not go far. He just stood on a high ground and watched all this from a distance. When she heard Li Yunyang's words, her heart suddenly moved. The things and problems she had been puzzled about in the way of cultivation were suddenly clear and connected from top to bottom. Se Chuyun, who was usually like an iceberg, was so excited that he couldn't control himself at this time. He kowtowed respectfully in the direction of Li Yundong. After bowing 3 times in a row, he raised his head and laughed, then turned around and floated away. In the distant Mount Koya, Tsuruko Tachibana was sitting in front of the TV and watching the program. She couldn't help sighing and saying, "There are so many masters in China. I only knew that Wang Yuanshan was a person who had comprehended the Great Way, but I didn't expect that Li Yundong would be so young and have comprehended such a realm. He is really a saint of the Tao." Masako Tachibana was silent at the side, but her face was full of admiration. Only Tachibana Wakako looked at her mother and grandmother in confusion. She didn't understand why Li Yunyang's simple words made them so excited and emotional. Li Yundong's words clearly told everyone here, "I don't know tea as well as you do, but I know the Tao better than all of you. As long as you agree that there is a tea ceremony for tea, then I know the tea ceremony because the great ways of the world are of the same origin. There is no reason to talk about the Great Way. If you understand it, you understand it. If you don't understand it, you don't understand it." Mortals breathe shallowly in their throats, while Jinren's breath goes deep into their feet. The same thing done by different people would result in different results. Fujiwara Tianhe scoffed at Li Yundong's words, but Qian Jingji instantly prostrated himself. Qian Jingji bowed respectfully to Li Yundong and said with admiration, "Mr. Li's tea ceremony has returned to its original nature and transcended the mortal world. I'm ashamed of my inferiority. Mr. Li can be called the saint of tea today." Qian Jingji. Chapter 985. Qian Rixiu had an important position in the history of Japan. It could even be said that he was synonymous with the Japanese tea ceremony. Similarly, after his death, the 3 schools of Qianjia, which were produced by his family, also occupied the main position in the tea industry of Japan. Among the 3 schools, the Qianjia was the most powerful. Although Qian Jingji did not have a decisive influence like his ancestor Qian Rixiu, his initiative to admit defeat also caused a great sensation. Whether it was the Japanese people in front of the TV or the Japanese people who watched the tea battle on the spot, they were almost instantly divided into 2 groups. One group was extremely agitated and indignant, loudly scolding Qian Jingji. "He has lost the backbone that a master should have. The Japanese tea ceremony should have its own unique characteristics, and it can't be changed by an outsider casually talking big." When Li Yundong and the others returned to their resting place to watch TV, Zhou Qin and Su Chan were very indignant when they saw these words. In Zhou Qin's words, "These idiots don't know what's good for them. Master's words are worth a lot of money. It's okay that they don't know what's good for them, but they actually want to deny and change the result of the tea battle." The little girl stood quietly at the side and didn't say anything. She just stared at Li Yundong, and Ziyuan also seemed to be thinking about something. She kept pinching her fingers. Naturally, it was impossible for Shen Hui to understand the truth of cultivation from Li Yundong's words. For her, these words were tantamount to not saying anything. She just followed Zhou Qin and nodded hard. Similarly, Although Chen Wankai was experienced and had a certain level of understanding and foundation, after listening to Li Yundong's words, he might have some improvement in his life realm. However, if he wanted to transform such a realm into the strength of cultivation, it would be a fool's dream. He couldn't even think about it. Any kind of enlightenment and transcendence was built on an unstable foundation. Some people talked big, but when they saw the real situation they would be seen through with a single glance. The 9 strategies beyond the swords was about using no moves to defeat moves, but there was a precondition. The precondition was that the user had to have seen all the martial arts moves in the world and know where the flaws of these moves were. Therefore he could easily break all the moves of the opponent with one move. If Li Yundong hadn't had absolute strength and prestige in the cultivation world, no one would have listened to what he had said. Even if someone had heard it, they would have scoffed at it. Who do you think you are? What right do you have to speak so generously here? However, such words were said by Masako Tachibana, who had defeated the top experts in the Japanese cultivation world, Tamamo no Mei, the strongest demon in the history of Japan, and the fighting heavenly lord, who had defeated all the gods and Buddhas by himself. That was different. The same sentence, if spoken by an ordinary person, would be nonsense, but if spoken by a famous person, it would be a peerless saying. The Japanese were divided into 2 factions because of Qian Jingji's actions, which Zhou Qin could understand. Although she could not accept it emotionally, she could still understand it rationally. However, what she could not accept the most was that the other faction of Japanese was actually neutral and looked at this matter with the mentality of a bystander. There were almost none who truly supported Qian Jingji. This was simply unimaginable. Especially when Su Chan saw that there were constantly people being interviewed in the TV station, she was curious and found Ziyuan to translate. After learning about the situation inside, she couldn't help but be tongue-tied and ask, "Sister Ziyuan, why don't these people understand the great way that Yundong mentioned?" Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "In fact, it's very normal. If so many people in the world understood the great way, the heaven realm would be overcrowded." Su Chan suddenly understood. It was really rare for someone with great wisdom to be able to see the general trend from a little. Su Chan turned her head to look at Li Yundong and asked, "Yundong, do you think this tea competition will help us open the Desangxian tea shop in Japan?" After Li Yundong returned to the place where he had stayed, he had been sitting between the tatami and the corridor, looking up at the sky. He didn't hear the angry voices of Zhou Qin and the others in the room. When Su Chan spoke to him, he turned his head, smiled slightly and said, "It doesn't matter whether it's helpful or not. What's important is that they have split up and wavered, and there are doubts and confusion. More importantly, they all know who I am and what the Desangxian is. This is an advertising effect that no amount of money can buy." Chen Wankai, who was beside him, also knelt down on the tatami and said with emotion, "Master, you really should go into business." Li Yundong chuckled and asked slyly, "But have you ever thought that if I go into business I won't be able to cultivate? If I don't know how to cultivate, how can these Japanese obey me? If they don't accept me, how can you sigh because of this?" Chen Wankai was stunned for a moment, then he laughed and said, "Master, your words are very meaningful. It makes sense. Although Chen Wansai's body was old and weak, and he had entered the declining body stage of cultivation, and there were great disadvantages when cultivating, he also had great advantages, which was that he had rich life experience and self-understanding. When Zhang Sanfeng entered the Tao, he was also an old man with gray temples. When Wang Chongyang entered the Tao, he was close to the age of knowing his destiny. When Lu Dongbin entered the Tao, he was already old. They were all late cultivators, but it didn't mean that they had no hope in cultivation. On the contrary, because they had the wisdom of the elders, they had a unique advantage over the young people in terms of understanding the realm. As the saying goes, the old don't practice martial arts, and the young don't cultivate the Tao. Chen Wansai's IQ was not necessarily higher than Shin Hui's, but he could comprehend different things from the same thing, while Shin Hui just went in one ear and out the other. Li Yundong saw that Chen Wankai had obviously comprehended something from his laughter. He showed a trace of appreciation and slowly nodded. He stood up and said, "The matter here is basically over. Let's all go back first." Li Yundong stood up and disappeared on the spot with a movement of his body. Chen Wankai and Shin Hui had been with Li Yundong for a long time, so they didn't feel strange. They just felt that Li Yundong had been very abnormal recently. After looking at each other, they looked at Su Chan, Ziyuan, and the others. By the time Su Chan, Ziyuan, Chen Wankai, and Shin Hui returned to Tianan City, it was already evening. After Li Yundong returned home, he had been sitting on the edge of the living room in the balcony, looking up at the sky silently without saying a word. Only when Su Chan and the others talked to him did he say a few words concisely. The little girl saw this. Although she felt strange in her heart, she was not worried. Anyway, as long as she was with her master, nothing else mattered. But Ziyuan didn't think so. She looked at Li Yundong's back and suddenly felt a little worried for no reason. She vaguely felt that there was something wrong, but she couldn't tell what it was. Because she knew that if Li Yundong didn't want to say it, no one in the world would know what was wrong with him. In fact, Li Yundong didn't know what was wrong with him. He always felt that there was something wrong with him. There seemed to be a pair of eyes staring at him all the time. This feeling was different from being stared at by God. In the past, he felt that God was staring at him with a pair of cold and dignified eyes. It was the eyes of a superior looking down on the common people. But this time he was being stared at by someone at the same level. Li Yundong felt strange in his heart. He released his qi and jinqi to explore, but he couldn't find anything. With his cultivation level, all life within 100 meters could not escape his perception. The slightest movement of grass, even a grain of sand and a stone were within his perception range. Naturally, it was impossible for anyone to hide and peep at him without being discovered by him. This feeling had begun to appear since Li Yundong returned from Mount Longhu. After arriving in Japan, it had obviously increased. At first, Li Yundong didn't take it to heart. He thought it was a psychological expectation that he might be noticed at any time in a foreign country. But when he returned to Tianan City, he found that this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. Li Yundong took a deep breath and temporarily put aside this strange feeling. He breathed slowly and steadily, gradually entering a deep state of meditation. This time he obviously felt different from before. In the past, when he entered a deep meditation, Li Yundong could feel that although most of the places around him were still dark, he was in a bright light. But this time, he found that his spirit space was full of auspicious clouds and rosy clouds, and the sky seemed to be overflowing with color and shining with divine light. Li Yundong was stunned. Soon he saw a person appear in the clouds. This person was dressed in a golden robe, had a feather crown on his head, and held a Jindan jade slip in his hand. This person looked at him from above in the clouds without saying a word. It was not until Li Yundong's figure was approaching him that he waved his hand and threw down the Jindan jade slip in his hand. Li Yundong raised his hand to catch it and saw that there were rows of ancient seal script written from right to left and from top to bottom on the jade slip. As far as Li Yundong's eyes could see, the characters on it slowly disappeared one by one. When the last character disappeared, Li Yundong suddenly woke up from his deep meditation. As soon as Li Yundong woke up, he fell into deep shock and thought. He suddenly remembered the song of the 9th turn of the heavenly Jindan technique. The 9 turns of the carefree Tao fruit is complete, and one becomes an immortal with 3,000 achievements. The Jindan jade slip announces the Qing dynasty, and the crane rides the cloud carriage to the cave. Does this mean that I have reached the peak of the golden immortal realm and can go to the highest heaven of the 9th heaven? But if I become an immortal, what about Su Chan? What about Ziyuan? What about Zhou Qing? What should I do with everything I have in this world? Li Yundong suddenly turned his head and looked at his home behind him. For a moment he was stunned. If nothing unexpected happens, the new book will be released on January 1st. As for the new title, it's a secret for the time being. Uneasy face. Chapter 986. Leader, are you going to abolish the Fox Zen school and set up your own school? Early in the morning, the little foxes of the Fox Zen school heard a piece of news that shocked her but was not surprised at all. Ever since Li Yundong had thwarted the plot of Lu Yi and the mystical silver fox, the Fox Zen school had existed in name only. There were only a few little foxes left. Even including Su Chan, who was an anomaly, the Fox Zen school, which had been glorious in the Tang dynasty and the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, had completely declined to the extreme. Although Su Chan was also a 9-tailed celestial fox thanks to the mystical silver fox, her strength as a 9-tailed celestial fox could not be compared with that of the mystical silver fox. Li Yundong sensed that God could not sit still any longer and was ready to call him back, so he began to prepare for his funeral. Regarding this premonition of the end of one's lifespan, almost every cultivation expert could foresee it, whether it was Zhang Daoling or Zhang Sanfeng in the cultivation world, or the tiger-headed junior guardian of the martial arts world, Sun Lutong, or the invincible divine spear Li Wen. They were all recorded in history to be able to predict the day of their lifespan. Among them, the founder of Taoism, Zhang Daoling, had a premonition that his time was coming to an end before he passed away. He recruited 3,000 disciples and passed on his position as the sect leader, his personal magic treasure, and his cultivation secret manual to his son, Zhang Heng. Not long after that he ascended to heaven. Sun Lutong, the Tiger-Head Junior Guardian, had also had a premonition that his death was coming. He told his family that he was going to die. His wife was shocked and ordered her daughter to take him to the German hospital in Beijing, which was now the Beijing Hospital. However, Sun Lutong said with a smile, "I'm fine." "Which hospital?" "It's just that there will be immortals and Buddhas to guide me. I want to go there." However, Mrs. Sun refused to believe Sun Lutong's nonsense. She doubted it and still asked her youngest daughter to accompany Sun Lutong to the examination. But after going to the hospital for examination, the German doctor, Steve, said, "Mr. Sun's body has no signs of harm and is even better than that of young people." After returning home, Mrs. Sun still did not believe it. She invited Kong Bohua, one of the 4 famous doctors in Beijing at that time. After looking at his pulse, Kong Bohua said, "Mr. Sun's 6 meridians are in harmony, and there is no flaw. This is the first time I've seen such a good pulse." Not long after, Sun Lutong said to his family, "The immortals and Buddhas have come to receive us." Then he asked his family to burn joss paper at the door and told them not to cry or be sad. He left a sentence, "I see life and death as a game." Then he smiled and flew away. When Li Yundong had just started cultivating, he had read about these things in the ancient books. But at that time he had only regarded them as legends and hadn't taken them seriously. But now he had finally understood the meaning of Jindan Jade slip announcing the Qing dynasty. Li Yundong knew that he couldn't just leave. He also knew that when he ascended he could actually take people with him. As the saying goes, when one man achieves the Tao, his chickens and dogs also ascend to heaven. This was the most intuitive explanation. Whether it was the protagonist of the story of chickens and dogs ascending to heaven, Lu and his family, or Zhang Daoling's 2 disciples, Wang Chang and Zhao Sheng, they all followed their boss and eventually ascended to the immortal world. For people like them, the immortal realm was another beginning. Their cultivation in the human world had already ended, but their cultivation in the immortal realm had just begun. However, the Jade Emperor also knew that it was definitely better to be a free and unfettered immortal in the human world than to be a nominal immortal in the heaven realm. Therefore, the Jade Emperor specially set a rule. This rule was that when one man achieves the Tao, his chickens and dogs also ascend to heaven. Otherwise, after these people ascended to heaven, all the seniors in heaven had their own subordinates and followers. What if he came up alone and lost his temper? For Li Yundong, he knew that after he cultivated to the golden immortal realm, all the rules in the human world, whether it was birth, old age, sickness and death, or power and wealth, would have no effect on him. There was no power or restraint in the human world that could control him. Therefore, at this time, the heaven must summon him to heaven. Otherwise, the order of the human world would be in chaos. Therefore, the Jindan Jade slip announcing the Qing dynasty that he had received was actually a naked threat. If you don't hurry up to heaven, the gods and Buddhas will come down to take you away. You can ignore yourself, but we are not afraid of killing all the people around you. This kind of thing had been done before in the heaven realm. Zhang Sanfeng was a case. This man lived from the southern Song dynasty to the middle of the Ming dynasty, and there were still people who saw him. Although he only began to cultivate when he was old, even if he began to cultivate at the age of 70, his cultivation had definitely steadily stepped into the golden immortal realm after 30 years. However, he still refused to go to heaven, which made the heaven realm so angry that it wanted to kill the people around him. However, he had abandoned the position of the leader of the Wu-Tang sect early and lived in seclusion in the mortal world. There was no one close to him. It was also because of this that there were many people with the surname Zhang in the Wu-Tang sect for hundreds of years, but none of them were the children of Zhang Sanfeng. This reclusive master had lived for 200 or 300 years, but he did not dare to leave a son at all, because he knew that if he did, it would only mean one thing: death. The heaven realm would not allow anyone close to him to live, so Zhang Sanfeng had to hide everywhere in the second half of his life. Li Yundong knew that even though he was not afraid of threats and could continue to live freely in the human world like senior Zhang Sanfeng, there were too many people around him that he cared about. He did not want anything to happen to them. Most importantly, he could take some of them with him to heaven. But who should he take with him or not? Or all of them? This was another question worth considering. But compared to this problem, there was a more important problem. He had to settle down the little foxes. Li Yundong didn't even ask if the little foxes were willing to go to the heaven realm with him. He didn't even tell Su Chan and the others. First, he was afraid that they would be worried. Second, he wanted to deal with some things first. Third, he was afraid that the little foxes would not adapt to the heaven realm. They were fox demons and did not have the strength to protect themselves. If they went to the heaven realm, it would be a disaster rather than a blessing. Fourth, he still had some unfinished plans in the human world that needed someone to take care of. Although the little foxes were naive and ignorant, they were loyal so they could be entrusted to him. After thinking about it, Li Yundong decided to settle them first. But to do so he had to do one thing first: abolish the Fox Zen school and establish a new sect. When the little fox Ling Yu heard that the leader wanted to abolish the Fox Zen school, she was a little reluctant, but she also knew his difficulties. She boldly asked, "Leader, what should we do if we abolish the Fox Zen school?" Li Yundong looked at the little foxes and said with a smile, "In fact, it's not abolishing. It's just changing the name of the original Fox Zen school, then giving it a new name and establishing a larger new sect." One of the little foxes next to him said timidly, "But leader, we think it's good as it is now." Ling Yu turned her head and glared at her. "Don't talk nonsense. Don't you know how much the leader has been implicated because of us?" Su Chan held Li Yundong's arm and just looked at him with a slight smile. She didn't say anything at all. Li Yundong turned to ask her, but she just smiled and shook her head. Instead, she asked curiously, "Yundong, you want to establish a new sect. What name are you going to give it?" Ziyuan and Zhou Qin were also next to him at this time. The two of them were the most concerned about Li Yundong establishing a new sect. One was very pleased to see Li Yundong establish a new sect, and the other was secretly delighted to see her master establish his own sect. After all, being a disciple of the leader of the Fox Zen school and being a disciple of the leader who had established his own sect were two completely different feelings. Ziyuan and Zhou Qin also looked at Li Yundong with their eyes wide open. Li Yundong glanced at them and said with a smile, "Do you have any good suggestions? Tell me, I remember that the name Desangxian was given by you." Thinking of the situation at that time, Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin all laughed. Ziyuan smiled and said, "That's right. We just started it. It's up to you to decide on the name." Zhou Qin also said with a smile, "Master, you mentioned this matter yourself. Although it happened suddenly, I think that since you brought it up at this time, you must have your own ideas. Besides, you are the one who established the sect. Of course, it's up to you to decide on the name. There's no reason for you to listen to us." Li Yundong chuckled and turned to look at Su Chan. "What about you?" As he said this, he tapped her nose and said with a smile, "Miss Pig, do you have any good suggestions?" Su Chan thought of how she had played with Li Yundong in the past and felt sweet in her heart. She didn't argue with Li Yundong, just smiled sweetly and said, "I'll listen to you." After Li Yundong asked around, they all said that they would listen to him. Only then did he say, "I thought about it. Since it's a sect that has been changed from the Fox Zen school, it should more or less retain some of the flavor of the Fox Zen school. I think we can keep the word Zen and replace it with the word Xian. What do you think?" Ling Yu, the little fox, murmured in a low voice, "Xian School, Xian School. It seems not bad." Ziyuan praised, "This name is good. The word Xian represents Taoism, and the word Zen represents Buddhism. It just reflects the characteristics of your dual cultivation of Buddhism and Taoism, and it also fits the characteristics of this sect." Li Yundong smiled and nodded. "Well, from now on there will be no Fox Zen school. There will only be Xian Zen school." Today the Fox Zen school, which had been founded by monk Baizhang and had been founded by Fox Master Pan Shi for nearly 1,300 years, had finally disappeared. The Xian Zen school, which Li Yundong had founded in its place, was officially established. After the news spread, the Chinese cultivation world was shocked. All sects looked at each other and talked about it. Tonight, a new cover and introduction were created. Everyone is welcome to collect and support it, but there is no official content update for the time being. The text will be officially updated on January 1st. Chapter 987. The establishment of a sect was always a big event that attracted people's attention. According to Li Yundong's idea, they should keep a low profile and do these things quietly by themselves. However, this idea was not agreed by his three disciples. Zhou Qin rarely expressed her firm opposition. When Shen Wankai heard that Li Yundong wanted to establish his own sect, he was overjoyed. When he heard that he wanted to do this in a low-key manner, he also shook his head. Lin Miao knew some of the old rules of China because of his relationship with Li Yundong, so he also tried to persuade him. Li Yundong was originally easygoing. After reaching the top realm of cultivation, he became even more easygoing. Seeing that the three of them were opposed, he didn't force them. He just said with a wry smile, "You want to keep a high profile? then what is considered a high profile? It's not good to alarm the secular world. Su Chan and Zi Yuan didn't have any requirements. They just smiled and watched the fun. Zhou Qin advised, Master, don't worry. We will definitely not alarm the secular world, but at least your invitation will be sent out. If the invitation is not sent, people will think that you don't respect them. Who knows what they will think of you? Shen Wankai echoed, that's right. Leave this matter to me. I have to make sure it is lively and grand. Shen Wankai had never kept a low profile since he got home. He knew that although it was easy to get into trouble if he kept a high profile these days, it might not be a bad thing as long as he did it well. Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, aren't you afraid that no one will come after the invitation is sent out? I've offended a lot of people in the cultivation world. Li Yundong's words made the little foxes of the Fox Zen school, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others look at each other. After the Battle of Mount Tianlong, Li Yundong had offended the Chinese cultivation world. It was already lucky that they didn't come to make trouble. Would they come to congratulate Li Yundong on establishing a sect? Unlikely. For a moment, Zhou Qin and Shen Wankai were speechless and looked at each other. At this time Lin Miao tried to persuade him, Master, it's not the same thing. Whether they come or not is another matter. If you don't come, they'll think that you're looking down on them. Then you'll lose the moral high ground. If they don't come, it'll be their fault. If they bring up their past grievances again, you can use this matter to blame them, right? Hearing this, Li Yunyang couldn't help laughing. At his current realm, he really took these things very lightly. However, Zhou Qin and Chen Wankai were overjoyed when they heard this. Zhou Qin couldn't help praising him. Lin Miao, you're right. Chen Wankai chuckled and said, second senior sister is becoming more and more like a Chinese now. Your idea is a typical Chinese idea. Interesting, it has the smell of power. Lin Miao pursed his lips into a smile and did not speak again, but he could not help sighing in his heart. He thought of his former companions, John and Alba, and wondered how they were doing now. Were they becoming more and more like Chinese just like him? In the past, when he had not integrated into this environment, he had not realized the tolerance of the national culture of this country. Now, Lin Miao had completely understood why this country and its people had been repeatedly invaded and even conquered by foreign nations for thousands of years, whether it was the Wei, Jin, Southern and Northern dynasties, the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, or the Yuan and Qing dynasties. However, in the end they were always the ones who had the last laugh. This was because this nation and this country had a very strong, deep and broad cultural foundation and tolerance. The invaders could conquer this civilization for a while, but in the end, they would be conquered by this civilization and devoured until they were integrated into one. Li Yunyang glanced at Lin Miao with a smile and said, since you all say so, then do it first. Anyway, no one will come when the time comes. I don't care if you lose face and make a fool of yourself. Zhou Qin and Chen Wankai were overjoyed. After receiving them, they went to do their own things. Zhou Qin, Zi Yuan, and Lin Miao were busy writing golden invitations. There were many cultivation sects in China, and there were more than a dozen or 20 branches of the Chuanzhen sect alone. It was not easy to send them all. Chen Wankai turned around and went out to busy himself with other things. Founding a sect was easy to say, but it was a complicated project. At the very least, there had to be a place for the sect to be established. Looking at all the cultivation sects in the world, which one didn't want to occupy a spirit mountain with their headquarters? Who would set up a sign in a city community and say that they were opening a sect? That would be a big joke and they would be laughed at by others. Therefore, a group of people reached a preliminary agreement that although Tianan City was still prosperous, there was no spirit mountain. After looking around, they all decided to set up the sect on Mount Tianlong, which used to be the Fox Zen School. However, the lease contract for the Taoist field on Mount Tianlong had not been settled. At first, Wang Jinyuan had used it as a transaction item to make a deal with Li Yunyang. Chen Wankai was going to settle this matter. Otherwise, if they set up a sect on Mount Tianlong and were driven out, it would be the most ridiculous thing in the world. Li Yunyang didn't care, but Chen Wankai couldn't afford to lose face. After the group of people finished their discussion, they dispersed to do their own things. Only Li Yunyang was the most leisurely. He leisurely looked at them with his hands in his sleeves and a slight smile on the corner of his mouth. Time passed quickly. After Zhou Qin and the others had sent out all the invitations, Li Yundong and the others had slowly moved their clothes to Dongwu City. The tea house of Desangxian had also been opened in Dongwu City. It could be said that they had completely moved their family business from Tianan City to Dongwu City. After waiting for another 3 days, Li Yunyang's Xianchan School was officially established on Mount Tianlong. To Li Yunyang's surprise, on the day of the opening ceremony, almost all the Chinese cultivation sects came. Some of them knew him and some of them didn't. For a moment, Mount Tianlong was full of people and masters. According to the rules, when a sect was established in a place, it would definitely be provoked and challenged by the local sections. It was just like when Li Yunyang went to Japan to open a tea house. He would definitely have to fight tea first. Only after passing the test could he be qualified to open a tea house. But who was Li Yunyang? He was a living golden immortal. Although others were not sure if he had reached the golden immortal realm, the fact that he had forced all the gods and Buddhas to retreat with one palm in the battle of Mount Tianlong was frightening and dumbfounded. Who would dare to ask him to see if he was qualified to open a sect? Even the reincarnation of Wisdom King was not qualified to open a sect, so who was? Who would be stupid enough to find trouble with him? Were they tired of living? Li Yunyang's establishment of a sect could be considered a precedent in the Chinese cultivation world. Many people came, but none of them came to make trouble. In the past, whether it was Zhang Tianshi, Wang Chongyang, or Zhang Sanfeng, when they had established their sects, they had all been challenged by people. If they wanted to establish a foothold in the cultivation world, it was absolutely impossible to rely on words alone. However, when Li Yundong stood at the gate of the mountain, his unmoving grandmaster aura was enough to make everyone shut up and give up the idea of provoking him. Li Yundong hadn't expected that so many people would come on the day of his establishment. In the morning, almost all the sects that had fought with him before and had conflicts with him had come, but all of them seemed to have forgotten what had happened in the past. They cupped their hands in obeisance, smiled, and presented endless gifts. Li Yundong had been greeting people with a smile. Even though his cultivation was high, his face was a little stiff after smiling all morning. Just as he was about to take a breath and rest, he saw the cultivators of the surrounding sects stir. Some sharp-eyed and quick-witted people pointed to the foot of the mountain and shouted, "Look, the Jingyi school is here." The conflict between Li Yundong and the Jingyi school could be said to be known by everyone in the Chinese cultivation world, but they didn't know that Li Yundong and the Jingyi school had reconciled. The two sides had turned hostility into friendship, and there was no internal strife. Li Yundong looked over and saw that Zhang Ling was among the people of the Jingyi school. Next to her were Zhang Kongyun, Zhou Ping, Zhang Lufang, and the others. In the distance, Zhou Ping, who was next to Zhang Ling, handed the golden invitation back to Zhou Qin. Zhou Qin took it and opened it. She was stunned and ran back to Li Yundong. Li Yundong looked at her with a smile, took the golden invitation and opened it. He was suddenly stunned. He looked at Zhang Ling and was speechless for a moment. There was a hint of sadness on Zhang Ling's face. She bowed to Li Yundong and said, "Zhang Ling, the temporary leader of the Jingyi school, greets Jinren Li, the leader of the Xianchan school." As soon as this was said, there was an uproar around. Zhang Ling has become the leader? What about Zhang Tianshi? Could it be? Li Yundong said in surprise, "Has the Taoist master already ascended to immortality? When did this happen?" Zhang Ling nodded slowly and said in a low voice, "It happened last night." Li Yundong was stunned. After a long time, he sighed and comforted her, "It's a good thing that Jinren Zhang has ascended to immortality. The Lady of the Earthly Fire must not be sad. The Jingyi school still needs you to cheer up. If there's anything you need help with, please let me know." Zhang Ling chose this time to announce the news of Zhang Tianxi's ascension to immortality. She also wanted to tell the cultivators of the world that their relationship with Li Yundong had been resolved and there was no need to sow discord. Moreover, Zhang Tianxi's death would definitely cause great turmoil. It would definitely be of great benefit to the Jingyi school in the future if they could win over Li Yundong's Xianchan school in advance. Zhang Ling forced a smile and nodded to Li Yundong. After handing over the list of gifts, she entered the Taoist temple. It was not until 2 o'clock in the afternoon that the number of people began to decrease. When Ding Nan finally arrived with the disciples of the Wuhua sect, it was already past 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Although Ding Nan and Zhou Qin still didn't see eye to eye with each other, the two of them finally understood the general situation and did not fight at this time. Li Yundong also began the opening ceremony in front of the main hall of the Xianchan school. When everyone saw that Li Yundong was burning incense in front of the tripod at such a young age, they couldn't help sighing. Li Yundong stood in the middle of the Taoist field and saw the sea of people around him. He was even more in a trance, as if he had suddenly remembered the scene when he had just passed through the heavenly tribulation and come to Tianlong Mountain to save the Fox Zen school. In this short span of a year, he had come from nothing to where he was now. Looking back, it really seemed like a lifetime had passed like a dream. Li Yundong was feeling a little dazed when someone next to him gently touched him. Li Yundong turned his head and saw Su Chan looking at him curiously with a pair of big eyes. She lowered her voice and said, "Yun. Leader, why are you in a daze? Everyone is looking at you." Li Yundong felt as if he had just woken up from a dream. He looked around and saw that the cultivators of all sects were looking at him with a smile, waiting for him to insert the incense stick in his hand into the tripod. Li Yundong sighed with mixed feelings in his heart. He bent down and bowed to the gods and Buddhas in the temple sect 3 times. Finally, he inserted the incense stick into the tripod. For a moment, congratulations, cheers, laughter, and applause from all sects rang out and floated far away from Tianlong Mountain. Happy New Year's Day, children. In addition, the new version has been set up, and it will be officially updated tomorrow. Below is the link. There is also a direct train on the right side of the new version, the Noon Invincible in the World. Everyone is welcome to come and support us. Chapter 988. After the opening ceremony, the leaders of the other sects left one after another. Li Yundong sat alone in the meditation room and was lost in thought, thinking about what he would do in the future. While Li Yundong was thinking about something, he suddenly heard the door open. He turned his head and saw the little girl standing at the door, looking at him with a smile. Her hands were behind her back as if she was hiding something. Li Yundong chuckled, waved at Su Chan and said, "What's wrong? Why are you being so mysterious?" Su Chan walked up to Li Yundong with a smile and opened her palm in front of him. It was a paper crane. The little girl said as if she was asking for credit, "Yundong, look, I can fold spirit cranes." As she spoke, the paper crane in her palm suddenly flapped its wings and flew up. Li Yundong laughed, pinched the little girl's nose and said, "I thought it was something important. You really don't know how to be shy. You are a 9-tailed celestial fox. Why are you still acting like a child? This is a low-level Taoist magic. What's there to show off?" Su Chan pouted and said, "You can't say that. If it hadn't been for this little paper crane, I don't know what would have happened later. I might not have been able to contact you." Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered that he and Su Chan had been in the flying crane legend. He chuckled and reached out to take the paper crane in his hand. He looked at Su Chan and said with a smile, "Yes, if we love each other for a long time we won't." Li Yundong originally wanted to say, "We won't be together every day," but Su Chan said with a cheeky smile, "We won't be in bed." Li Yundong laughed, hugged the little girl, kissed her forehead and said with a smile, "Silly girl." Su Chan giggled, and her soft body snuggled in Li Yundong's arms, as if she wanted to rub herself into Li Yundong's body. Li Yundong hugged Su Chan and suddenly thought of something. He asked softly, "Chanro?" Su Chan put her arms around Li Yundong's waist and replied sweetly, "Hmm?" Li Yundong smiled and asked, "If I ascend to the heaven realm one day, will you go with me?" The little girl was a smart person. She immediately raised her head and asked in surprise, "Yundong, are you going to ascend? Do you want to go?" Li Yundong asked in return. Su Chan nodded without hesitation and said, "I'll go wherever you go. You can't leave me behind. Even if you go to hell, I'll follow you." Li Yundong smiled and tapped her nose. "Don't be silly. Why would I go to the 18th level of hell? Are you cursing me?" Su Chan smiled and pressed her cheek against his chest. Her eyes were closed and her face was full of smiles. It was as if the two of them would stay like this forever. After a while, Li Yundong patted her on the shoulder and said, "Get up. Before going to the heaven realm, I have to see someone." Su Chan raised her head and asked, "Who are you looking at?" "Should I go?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "You go with him. This person is more or less related to you." Su Chan was surprised, but she didn't say anything. She got up and followed Li Yundong out. Li Yundong took Su Chan and flew in the direction of Tianan City. Su Chan's heart skipped a beat, and she vaguely guessed who Li Yundong wanted to see. After arriving at Tianan City, Li Yundong landed next to a building in the city center. He didn't go in but just watched from the side. Su Chan didn't ask much and stayed obediently by the side. It wasn't until the sun was about to set that many office staff and beautiful white-collar workers came out of the building. There was a familiar figure in this group of people. Li Yundong looked at this figure and for a moment, his eyes were complicated and filled with emotion. Su Chan took a closer look and saw that this woman was extremely beautiful and stunning. It was Chao Kefi. Su Chan was slightly surprised and said, "Has her soul been reconstructed?" Li Yundong looked at Chao Kefi and nodded slowly. Yes, Ziyuan reconstructed her soul in the lotus pool and washed away all her memories related to the cultivation world, including ours. She has nothing to do with the mystical silver fox now. Su Chan sighed softly and looked at Chow Kefi. For a moment, she was filled with emotion. Does she still know you now? As soon as she finished speaking, she saw Chow Kefi suddenly look at them with a smile on her face. She raised her hand happily and waved it. Su Chan was shocked. Does she still know us? She stared blankly at Chow Kefi walking toward them. For a moment, Su Chan was at a loss and didn't know how to greet Chow Kefi. If she still remembered the matter of the mystical silver fox, what was her relationship with her? Previous life? This life? Next life? This relationship is really complicated. But just as Su Chan was struggling, she saw Chow Kefi walk to their side. She walked straight past them and said to another person with a smile, "You're here? Hurry up and get in the car. I've been waiting for you for a long time." Su Chan turned her head and saw a slim woman standing next to Chow Kefi. This woman had long black hair, which reached her waist, and was wearing a pair of big sunglasses that almost covered half of her face. She was very charming. Su Chan could tell who this person was from the woman's figure. She couldn't help but whisper, "Lu Feier?" Li Yundong didn't look back. He patted Su Chan on the shoulder and said, "Let's go. Even if we meet, we won't know each other. If we're fated, we'll meet again in the future. Let's go somewhere else." Su Chan responded with an "oh." She looked at Chow Kefi and Lu Feier reluctantly and turned to leave. Lu Feier looked at Li Yundong and Su Chan and was stunned when she saw them leaving. She opened her mouth to call out to them, but Chow Kefi had already walked up to her, took her arm and said with a smile, "Why are you here today? Where are we going to eat? Hey, I'm talking to you." Chow Kefi reached out and waved her hand in front of Lu Feier's eyes. Lu Feier was stunned for a moment before she came to her senses. What did you say?" Chow Kefi said with a smile, "Hey, you're a little too much. Which handsome guy did you see? You're staring at him." As she said this, she followed Lu Feier's gaze and saw Li Yundong and Su Chan gradually disappearing. She smiled and said, "Oh, he already has a girlfriend. What are you still looking at?" Lu Feier looked at Chow Kefi in disbelief and asked, "Sister Chow, you're not serious? Don't you know them?" Chow Kefi was stunned. "Them? What them? Do I know them?" Lu Feier was stunned and couldn't help looking at Li Yundong and Su Chan. She opened her mouth and wanted to say the identity of these two people, but for a moment she didn't know where to start. Chow Kefi looked at the figures of Li Yundong and Su Chan and was a little lost for a moment. Her eyes became more and more confused and she slowly said softly, "Why do I feel like I seem to know them?" Lu Feier's heart trembled. She couldn't help but sigh and slowly shake her head. After Li Yundong and Su Chan left, they returned to their home in Tianan City. Although his current foundation had begun to move to Dongwu City, there were still many things that had not been moved from his home in Tianan City. The house that had been rented in the community had still not been returned. Li Yundong returned to his room and looked at the familiar layout. His eyes were reluctant to part with it. He smiled and said to Su Chan, "Take a good look at this place. In the future, you may not be able to see it." The little girl answered obediently. Li Yundong also looked around the room and thought to himself, "I took Su Chan to ascend and I got what I wanted. In the future I will be free and unfettered, but am I really willing to let go of everything in this world like this? What about Ziyuan? What about Zhou Qin?" The more Li Yundong thought about it, the heavier his heart became. Just as he was unable to make up his mind, he heard two people suddenly land outside the balcony of the room. The two of them took a look at the room and laughed. It was Zhou Qin and Ziyuan. Zhou Qin smiled and said to Ziyuan, "I told you that both of them are here." Ziyuan pursed her lips and said with a smile, "Yes, your eldest disciple knows your master best." Zhou Qin smiled and said jokingly, "Master, you left without saying goodbye and left us behind. That's not good." The two of them came in hand with a smile, and two pairs of beautiful eyes fixed on Li Yundong. When Li Yundong heard Zhou Qin's unintentional words, his originally confused heart suddenly trembled. He looked at Su Chan, then at Ziyuan and finally at Zhou Qin. For a moment he was filled with melancholy and didn't know what to do. The expression on his face was sad and happy, and he was actually stunned. Please take a few seconds to read the whole speech. Finally, it was over. All good things must come to an end. After writing the last word, Tang Tang had mixed feelings in his heart. He didn't know what it was like to be sad and happy at the same time. "Tang Tang, I've experienced many things over the past year, and I've also met many respectable and adorable friends. I can't thank each and every one of you, but from the bottom of my heart, I sincerely thank each and every one of you for accompanying me all the way here. Thank you. Without you, there would not have been this book and the results of this book. I know that many readers have left me messages saying that there are still many things left unexplained in this book. In fact, I also know that because I have already put their stories in the next book. Among them are Meiduo, Zhou Qin, Ding Nan, Lin Miao, Li Sen, Zhao Jing, Lu Feier, Yan Feng and Song Yuqiao. I will also reveal their respective fates, including who Li Yundong ended up with in the end, and what happened to the Shenshan school in the sequel, Invincible in the World. The sequel has officially been updated today. The style of this book is the same as that of the Fox Spirit, but the protagonist's character is different from Li Yundong's. Otherwise, if everything is the same, everyone might as well read the Fox Spirit again, right? There will also be a funny story and touching love, but there will also be different new things. There will be laughter, tears, passion, and mystery. I believe that everyone will like this story when the time comes. In 2012, we will end raising a fox spirit at home. In 2012, we will start a new story, the new Invincible in the World. I look forward to your attention. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.